Chapter 859. In the dead of night, the big black horse ran back to the divine hall of light. It did not dare to neigh, but kept shaking its head. The sound of its hooves was particularly brisk, and its mane wet with dew danced in the wind. Suddenly, it felt that someone was looking at it. It looked back in surprise and saw the tall and fat figure in the depths of the divine hall. Instantly, it sweated profusely, washing away the dew on its body. Sang Sang did not punish it for its disloyalty. She walked to the railing of the balcony behind the divine hall with her hands clasped behind her back. She looked at the young man who was falling like a leaf between the cliffs in silence. The moon had been covered by clouds for several nights. The color of the mountains in the West Hill Divine Kingdom had darkened, and it was very quiet. Only the cliffs below the divine hall would occasionally make a very small sound. Except for her, no one could hear those sounds. Since the first night, she had stood by the railing and watched this scene quietly. She watched him jump from the peach blossoms to the cliffs, watched him fall dangerously, watched him climb up with difficulty, watched him wait by the east side of the stables every night, and watched him quietly return to the bottom of the cliff before dawn. She did nothing but watch in silence. Until tonight, she saw the man on the cliffs raise his head and look at the divine hall where she was. She knew he was looking at her. She knew he could not see her, but she could see something in his eyes. The thing in the man's eyes was to remove all thoughts. It was not to remove all thoughts, but to send his thoughts elsewhere. In other words, he was sending his thoughts to the balcony of the divine hall of light. She was the object of his thoughts. She was Haotian, and humans like ants were not qualified to miss her. So she thought it was disrespectful to her, or even blasphemy. The hatred and anger in her consciousness burst out uncontrollably again. Just like the uncontrollably burst out of the man's eyes. The fierce wind rose from the sea of the kingdom of song thousands of miles away, whistling through the high night sky. The night clouds above the divine kingdom were shaken and uneasy, like cotton under a rope, as if they could be torn apart at any time. The peach blossoms in the mountains and fields shivered, and tens of thousands of petals were blown off by the wind. The roofs of several divine halls on the Peach Mountain, which were made of gold and jade, began to whimper. The divine hall of light was far away on the peak. Ning Ke could not see it clearly no matter how good his eyesight was. Even if he could see it clearly, it was impossible for him to see the tall and fat woman standing by the balcony railing. Moreover, in his imagination, if his surname was Luo, then the cliff would definitely be under the balcony, and the girl by the railing would naturally be thin and small. He looked at that place and smiled. He withdrew all his thoughts and confusion about his unknown fate into the depths of his sea of consciousness. He calmed his mind and continued to walk down the precipice. At this moment, a wild gust of wind howled from the sky and landed heavily on his body with the stench of seawater. He felt a thick damp coldness on his face. When it merged with the gaze he had faintly sensed earlier, it immediately destroyed the dhyana state he had maintained. Without the state of dhyana, Ning Ke's emblematic gesture naturally dispersed. What was even more terrifying was that no matter how calm he was in danger, even if he re-entered the state of dhyana, his hands could not form emblematic gestures again. The night wind was too cold and too strong. It howled around his body violently. Every time he tried to form emblematic gestures, it would blow away his emblematic gesture. The emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect could no longer be used. Ning Ke no longer had any connection with the precipice. He was blown into the abyss by the strong wind. At this moment, he was more like a stone than a fallen leaf. The fall this time was even more terrifying than the fall on the first night. In just a breath's time, he had fallen thousands of feet between the precipice and his speed became faster and faster. He fell into the deep night fog. Haotian no longer cared for him. In the next moment, he might be shaken out of the precipice by the precipice. Without any place to hold on to, he would directly break through the fog and fall to his death. In the face of desperation, Ning Kai made the toughest and quickest response. With a muffled groan, the great spirit in his body was released without hesitation. His hands suddenly stretched forward like two sharp knives, stabbing into the hard cliff wall. Two cracking sounds could be heard. His arm, which was as hard as iron, had cut a hole about 20 feet long in the cliff. Finally, he stopped falling and stopped on the precipice. He did not get rid of the desperate situation. Although he was holding onto the precipice tightly, he could no longer maintain the state of Buddhism sex dhyana. The shocking array on the precipice began to attack his eyes and sense of perception. He could only endure the sharp pain in his eyes and the huge waves in his sense of perception, desperately clinging to the cold precipice. Something even stranger happened. The forces that he had once sensed in the clouds and fog on the precipice swam over like snakes. In a very short period of time, they densely covered the surface of his body. Ning Kai endured the pain in his sense of perception and released his psyche power to sense. However, he could not identify what those wisps of power were. When he looked with his naked eyes, he found that they were just wisps of fog. The fog that surrounded the precipice of Peach Mountain and was responsible for sealing the U prison was naturally not a simple fog. Those wisps of fog strangely seeped into his clothes and then continued to seep into his body. There was no blood, but he could clearly feel the pain and the clear feeling of being cut. As the wisps of fog invaded, he felt as if he was being cut by countless sharp knives. At this moment, Ning Kai's respect for the Abbey Dean in the Battle of Chang'an had reached its peak. Because he finally understood how it felt to be cut by thousands of knives, and how painful it was. Then, something even more incredible happened. As his hands went deep into the precipice that had not moved for thousands of years suddenly moved. No one could see the vibration of the precipice, not even Ning Kai who was very close to it. No one could hear the vibration of the precipice, not even Ning Kai's ears. But his heart could hear it. The precipice vibrated in a soothing rhythm. This vibration traveled along his hands that were inserted into the wall, to his body, to his sense of perception, and finally to his heart. Ning Kai's body began to vibrate uncontrollably. His clothes were shaken so much that there seemed to be an earthquake in the depths of his sense of perception. The waves on the sea became even more ferocious. The most terrifying thing was that his heart was beating very strongly, as if it could burst into countless pieces at any time. The precipice of Peach Mountain turned into a giant war drum, vibrating silently between heaven and earth. Ning Kai, who was on the drum, no matter whether he was a fallen leaf or a stone, would be shattered by this war drum. There were two big tactical arrays on the precipice where the U prison was located. One was called Dazzling, and the other was Shocking. When they were combined, it would be shocking to the eye, and it could kill all enemies who came to it. At this moment, Ning Kai felt as if there were tens of thousands of swords stabbing into his eyes, and tens of thousands of drums beating in his body. His heart could be broken at any time. If it were not for the experience of the past few nights, he would not have been able to hold on until now. If it were not for the fact that his body was as hard as iron and stone, he would have vomited blood and died. Even so, his face became abnormally pale, and the pain was indescribable. What really made him feel unbearable was the night fog that lingered around his body. The night fog was not condensed by the qi of heaven and earth, but was refined by Haotian Taoism with the resentment of countless prisoners who died unjustly in the U prison over the past tens of thousands of years into the tactical array that guarded the U prison. Many of the prisoners who were qualified to be imprisoned in the U prison were powerhouses with great divine sense. Their psyche power was extremely strong when they were alive, and their resentment was terrifying. After their deaths, the two merged and were cultivated by Haotian Taoism's tactical array. Every wisp of fog was a sharp blade filled with all kinds of negative emotions such as bitterness, resentment, and resentment. It was extremely powerful. Otherwise, how could someone like Wei Guangming be imprisoned for more than 10 years? No matter how strong Ning Kei's willpower was, he could barely hold on under the shocking pain, but he could not withstand the cutting of these thousands of blades of evil aura. After all, he was not the invincible Abidine. His heart beat faster and faster, and the precipice in front of him became more and more blurry. More and more blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. His consciousness became more and more blurred, but the pain was still so clear. He could not hold on any longer. Just as he was about to pull his hands out from the precipice and escape from this terrifying precipice and cloud at the cost of his life, a ray of light suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. He thought that he was hallucinating, but the next moment, he found that it was not. The cold and dark precipice in front of him really became bright. The night clouds above Peach Mountain were blown away by the hurricane from the storm sea thousands of miles away, revealing the full moon. The silver moonlight shone on the mountains, on the precipice, and on him. On the edge of the balcony of the Divine Hall of Light, Sang Sang looked at the bright moon in the night sky with her hands behind her back. Her ordinary face looked a little pale, perhaps due to weakness or other reasons. The moonlight did not have any heat, but when it shone on Ning Kei, he felt warmth seeping into his body from the surface of his skin. Even his wildly beating heart became much calmer. The clouds around the precipice were dispersed by the moonlight. He took advantage of this fleeting opportunity to calm down and re-enter the state of dhyana. His right hand formed the Taoist emblematic gesture and he was ready to leave. At this moment, he suddenly saw the stone window on the precipice beside him. He had seen this stone window on the opposite precipice that day, but the precipice was shrouded in clouds from time to time, and there was a tactical array to hide it, so he did not observe it carefully. At this moment, the clouds were dispersed by the moonlight, and he re-entered the state of dhyana. He saw the stone window and the person in it. At this moment, Ning Kei should have left this terrifying precipice as soon as possible. But looking at the stone window, he knew that he could not leave. Because the person in the stone window was a young fat man. Perhaps it was because the food in the U prison was good that the person's cheeks, which had become thinner, became round again. He looked at Ning Kei outside the stone window and was so shocked that he could not speak. His eyes were still so clean, and his expression was still so amiable. When he was shocked, he was still the same as before, and his mouth was so big that it could swallow Tang Xiaotang's fist. About the role contest, I don't know why Yi Hongyu was placed as the best actor. I will go and ask tomorrow. As for the photo, Sang Sang really cannot find a suitable photo. Now, I have written Sang Sang according to AI Xiaoqi. Yes, of course, she is fatter than her, and she does not look as delicate. Now, Sang Sang is just a tall, white, and fat ordinary girl. Please remember. There will still be 2 chapters tomorrow, but the update will still be late. Please vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 860. Ning Kei would never have imagined that he would see Chun Pippi's annoying face in the precipice. He and his senior brothers and sisters in the academy all thought that Chun Pippi had brought the Abbey Dean back to the Jishou Abbey. They would never have imagined that he would be locked up in the precipice and become a prisoner in the U prison of the West Hill Divine Palace. Chun Pippi would never have imagined that he could see Ning Kei's annoying face in the light outside the stone window where the scenery never changed. He looked dull, but he was actually extremely smart. He had long predicted that Ning Kei would become a prisoner of Chang and City, but he did not expect that this guy would be so bold as to come to the West Hill Divine Palace and appear in front of him. This was a reunion that no one had expected. The 2 brothers stared at each other through the stone window. They were stunned for a long time, and then they began to laugh foolishly. The cell was very simple. There was only a bed and some tools. Ning Kei looked inside through the stone window and found that it was dry and there were no bloodstains. There was food and water on the small table. He felt slightly relieved. Then he began to observe the stone window. This encounter was too sudden. The academy did not know that Chenpipi was locked up in the U prison and did not have any plans. But now that he had seen it, there was no need to hesitate. He prepared to rescue Chenpipi from the U prison without hesitation. As he observed, his expression became solemn. It was not because the clouds dispersed by the moonlight were cutting his body again, but because he found that it was indeed very difficult. The stone window was very small and could only see the sky. Even bigger birds could not fly in. If he wanted to rescue Chenpipi from the cell, he had to pry the stone window open. However, when he stretched out his hand, he was blocked. He was shocked to find that the precipice was a hole. The stone window was a small hole in the precipice. If he wanted to pry open the stone window, he would have to pry open the entire precipice of Peach Mountain. There was an extremely powerful tactical array hidden in the mountain. It was very likely to be a confinement. How could it be done? The West Hill Divine Palace's Dharma access was so powerful. Other than the headmaster of the academy, who could pry open this Peach Mountain with countless talismans? After all, even Wei Guangming, the first person to successfully escape from the U prison in countless years, did not dare to pry open the stone window. Instead, he chose to push down the wooden sticks in front of him. Ning Ke said, "It seems that you have to stay inside for 2 more days. I need to think of a way." Chenpipi stood by the stone window, somewhat perplexed and did not respond. Ning Ke then remembered that he did not hear Chenpipi's laughter when they looked at each other and laughed. He thought of a possibility and slowed down to ask, "You can't hear it?" Chenpipi looked at his lips, nodded, and said something. Ning Ke understood the words from the movement of his lips, "Nothing but light can enter this window." Ning Ke thought for a while and was about to say something when Chenpipi suddenly showed an anxious expression on his face. His lips moved slightly and he kept saying something. He understood the names of Sang Sang and Tang Xiaotang. He understood what Chenpipi wanted to say. He nodded to indicate that he already knew what had happened to Sang Sang. Then he told him that Tang Xiaotang was at the back of the mountain of the academy and that there was no need to worry. The moonlight fell from the night sky, falling on the precipice and on Ning Quebec. Some rays of light passed through the narrow stone window and fell on Chenpipi's face. The two talked silently. "Wait for me to get you out," Ning Ke said while looking at Chenpipi's eyes. He spoke very slowly and his pronunciation was very accurate. He made sure that Chenpipi could understand every word he said and feel his determination. Chenpipi looked at him quietly and suddenly laughed and shook his head. Ning Ke looked at the smile on his face and slowly stuck out his middle finger. He said, "You are now a prisoner. You have no choice but to wait passively for me to save you." After saying this, he looked at his middle finger bathed in the moonlight. He was puzzled. How could he be so safe on the precipice with only the emblematic gesture of meditation left on his left hand? In the moonlight, Ning Ke reached out to the stone window and triggered the inhibition of the U prison. The divine halls of West Hill knew that someone had approached the U prison and began to be vigilant. The black-robed deacons of the judicial department were everywhere on the 3 cliff plateaus of Peach Mountain. But no one had found the Revelation Institute at the foot of the mountain. Ning Ke was not worried that they would find him. The peach blossoms on the mountainside were his best shield. As long as the divine halls did not think that someone could pass through the peach blossoms, they would not look down the mountain with suspicion. Other than thinking about how to save Chenpipi from the heavily guarded U prison, what made him feel inexplicably cold was the cold gaze that fell from the peak that night. He was sure that there was no one in the divine halls on the peak at that time. But he did not know why he felt that someone had been watching him. Whose cold gaze did it belong to? He admitted that courage was very important in a battle, but it could not fundamentally determine victory or defeat. That was why he could not leave Chang'an with courage alone. The academy had made detailed arrangements in advance. His hiding in the Divine Hall was an important part of the plan. If that cold gaze was really as he had guessed, then it would not affect the academy's plan at all. The real impact was still on Chen Pipi. Haotian's world was so stable, as if it would never change. But in the human world, which was made up of countless trivial details, change was the norm. The academy's plan had to be adjusted accordingly after he saw Chen Pipi's face between the cliffs. They might even have to start from scratch. Ning Ke could not understand why the West Hill Divine Palace would lock Chen Pipi in the U prison. Even if the Abbey Dean was dead and the Jishou Abbey could not continue to control the West Hill Divine Palace behind the scenes, and even if Chen Pipi's identity as a disciple of the academy was unacceptable to Haotian Taoism, it was still so unbelievable to secretly imprison someone of Chen Pipi's status. Were the bigwigs in the Divine Hall not afraid that Haotian Taoism would split because of this? In the middle of the night, Ning Ke once again followed the path through the peach blossoms to the cliff. However, the clouds were thick tonight, and the moonlight could not shine on the human world. Clouds and mist lingered below the cliff. Thinking of the pain he had suffered last night and the hatred in the mist, he did not dare to go down. It was the same for the next few nights. He could not see Chen Pipi. After that, Ning Ke used the Great Spirit to heal the internal injuries he had suffered on the cliff. He flipped through countless old classics and tried to find a feasible method. Then, he began to observe the moon every night. Since light could enter through the narrow stone window, so could the images. He did not want to act like a fool with Chen Pipi between the cliffs, so he began to write letters. Ning Ke dipped his brush in ink and left clear and beautiful handwriting on the snow-white paper. He sat behind the desk and kept writing. He wrote about the academy's plan and his own thoughts without leaving anything out. At the end of the letter, he even talked about the things that happened in the back of the mountain and asked if the food in the U prison was really that good. In the garden in front of the Revelation Institute, Long Qing and the flower addict Lu Qinjia were also watching the moon. Lu Qinjia was still as beautiful as ever, like a beautiful flower. However, her petals were stained with water, making her look a little cold. She was no longer as beautiful as she used to be. Long Qing wore a silver mask on his face. Now, no one could see the face under the mask. The beautiful face that had once captivated countless girls in the world was only a memory. I don't know when it started to become a habit to eat sweet potatoes in midsummer. I heard that this habit has been maintained in the Divine Hall for thousands of years. Habits are indeed powerful. Long Qing looked at the half-sweet potato in his hand. His lips that were exposed under the silver mask curled up slightly. He said calmly, "I just did not expect that it would be so easy to form a new habit." Lu Qinjia looked at the scar below his lips and her expression darkened. She thought that it was not terrible to get used to failure, but it was more depressing to forget the old habits. Were we so unfamiliar when we were in front of flowers and under the stars? After the war against the Tang Empire, Long Qing returned to the West Hill Divine Palace and found that everything had changed. He used to be the priest of the Divine Hall of Judgment. However, the person sitting on the seat of heavenly black jade was Yi Hongyu. How could he return to the Divine Hall of Judgment? Moreover, he had been convicted of apostasy. Although the Abbey Dean had cleared his name, many people in the Divine Hall looked at him with mixed feelings after the Abbey Dean's crushing defeat in Chang'an. The West Hill Divine Palace had suffered heavy losses in this war. As a powerhouse in the upper knowing destiny state, he should have been more respected. With his seniority and state in Haotian Taoism, even Yi Hongyu and his past crimes could not affect his position. He believed that no one would object if he were to directly take over as the great divine priest of revelation. However, everyone knew that he had encountered the black wind in the south of Chang'an. His proud state had been shattered by the blade intent in the wind and he was still badly injured when he returned to the Divine Hall. No one believed that he could climb back up from the abyss of despair and return to the peak like he did after he was crippled by Ning Quebec. Just as Lu Qinjia had thought, failure was not scary. However, how could he withstand such a heavy blow when he had been defeated so many times that it had become a habit? If the new emperor of the Yan kingdom, Chongming, had not sent a lot of benefits to the Divine Hall and had firmly expressed his support for him, and if he had not controlled the tens of thousands of elite cavalries in the eastern wilderness, he might not even be able to keep his position as the Minister of Offerings in the Revelation Institute, let alone the great Divine Priest of Revelation. I am not talking about getting used to losing to Ning Quebec. I am talking about everyone in the Divine Hall. They have only used half a year to get used to the moon above their heads. Long Qing looked at the moon that had broken through the thick clouds in the night sky and said, "The peach blossoms that had not bloomed for decades suddenly bloomed again this year and have not withered since. People have actually gotten used to such a magical thing. No one has ever looked at the mountain full of peach blossoms and asked why." His gaze fell on the Divine Hall of Light on the peak and said, "I want to ask. There is one more chapter. Try to finish it before 3:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 861. The lights in the Divine Hall of Light went out and the peach blossoms all over the mountain bloomed. Even though the Hierarch Lord had not been seen since he returned from the academy, everyone knew that he had sustained irrecoverable injuries. However, on the day the peach blossoms bloomed, the Hierarch's sacred sedan reappeared. Everyone looked at the shining figure behind the veil and realized that his injuries had all healed. He was even more powerful than before. Since spring, many changes had taken place in the West Hill Divine Palace. However, no one seemed to have noticed it. Some people could not sense such changes, while others did not dare to. These things can only be guessed, but cannot be guessed. That is why the process has become interesting. The people in the Divine Hall are all smart, truly smart. That is why they will not die, because they are smart. Long Qing looked at Lu Qinjia and said, "Some things can be guessed, and I want to confirm it. I need to go to the U prison. Now that the Divine Hall of Judgment has their eyes on me and Yi Hongyu has killed all my people, I have no chance. However, you are different. I want to ask you for help." His expression and tone were much gentler than before. He was no longer as arrogant and cold. However, it sounded cold to Lu Qinjia's ears because there was politeness in it. "What's different about me?" she asked. Long Qing looked at the Divine Hall of Light and said, "It is said that she was beside the great Divine Priest of Revelation before he died. She went to see the Hierarch and the Hierarch's blind eyes were healed. However, the peach blossoms have bloomed for such a long time and she has never entered the Divine Hall of Judgment. She has never seen Yi Hongyu." Lu Qinjia said, "What are you trying to say?" Long Qing said, "If I am not wrong, the person in the Divine Hall of Light is really her. You used to have a bad relationship with Ning Ke, but now you have an advantage. As long as the two girls in white in the Divine Hall say something, you can help me. Even Yi Hongyu will not dare to stop you." Lu Qinjia lowered her head and asked, "Why?" Long Qing said, "Because she knows that helping you is helping me. She will do anything that will make the academy and Ning Ke unhappy, because this is what she hates the most." Lu Qinjia said, "Why don't you go to the Divine Hall of Light directly? Everyone knows that you are the one who hates Ning Ke the most in the human world." After a moment of silence, Long Qing said, "I dare not take the risk because she used to hate me." Lu Qinjia looked into his eyes and said, "You just said that smart people die easily because they are smart. Mortals speculate about heaven's will. This is also a risk." Long Qing said, "There are some things that we have to do even if we die." Lu Qinjia looked at the flowers in front of her and asked, "When?" Long Qing said, "The sooner the better, because I don't have much time." Lu Chenjia said, I like that you are so honest with me, so I will do it. But I still don't understand why you want to enter the U prison. Long Qing said, I want to see someone. Lu Chenjia asked, why? Long Qing said, I have been to the Jishou Abbey. The gate is closed. Lu Chenjia looked at his face and said in a trembling voice, you still haven't given up? Long Qing said calmly, if I give up so easily, how can I be worthy of the hardships I've suffered over the years and the countless times I didn't give up in desperate situations? Lu Chenjia felt the aura coming from his body and knew that he had obtained true peace. She could not understand why a man who was so calm would still be so stubborn. A calm heart does not mean a dead heart. Long Qing looked at his chest, under the black divine robe. There was a hole there. There was no heart inside, only a black peach blossom. When the mountain of peach blossoms bloomed, the black peach blossom in his chest that had almost withered in the south of Chang and miraculously recovered. He felt that this was a sign from Haotian. He looked in the direction of the divine hall of light and said calmly, I have thought too much in the past. My Taoist heart is firm but mottled. Those mottled spots are the traces of shadows, just like the dreams I entered when I climbed the mountain in the academy. I saw light and darkness, but I could not figure out where I should stand. Now, I just want to heal my injuries and have a fair fight with Ning Quebec. I want to see who Haotian has chosen. Even if Haotian did not choose me, I can't not choose myself. The bright moon shone on the trees of the Revelation Institute and the peach blossoms all over the mountain. Ning Ke stood at the edge of the cliff in front of the flowers and looked at the full moon in the night sky. After confirming that there would be no clouds tonight, he jumped to the opposite cliff. He used the emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect to stop thinking about the array intent coming from the cliff. Then, he slowly loosened his right hand and grabbed the rope hanging from the cliff. The rope was very long and strong. One end of it was tied to the neck of the big black horse on the cliff platform above the precipice, while the other end was tied tightly to Ning Ke's waist on the precipice. He pulled the rope gently and sent a signal to the plateau high above. The big black horse felt the vibration from the rope and slowly walked to the edge of the cliff. Ning Ke fell down the cliff. With the moonlight, the clouds that shrouded the U prison were much lower, revealing the stone windows that looked like ant nests. Ning Ke came to the cell where Chen Pipi was and pulled the rope again. The big black horse did not continue forward. Ning Ke was worried that he would be swallowed by the clouds and fall to his death. Now that he was tied by the big black horse, he should be at ease. But looking at the clouds not far below his feet, his heart still palpitated. He did not dare to look at his feet and looked directly at the stone window. Chen Pipi looked at him with a smile in the stone window. Only light could pass through the stone window. Even if someone were to use the blood-colored giant knife to chisel the stone on the cliff, the sound would not be able to enter the cell. Chen Pipi could immediately find Ning Ke outside the stone window. It was not because he had a telepathic connection with Ning Ke, nor was it because he could predict. It was because he had been looking outside the window. To be more precise, in these few days, he ate, bathed, and farted, but he did not sleep much. He had been looking outside the stone window all the time. The deacon in the U prison thought that he had gone crazy from being locked up and was staring at the unchanging blue sky. In fact, he was just waiting for Ning Quebec. He knew that Ning Ke would definitely come, but he did not know when. So, he could only keep looking outside the stone window to make sure that he would not miss it. Ning Ke took out the letter that he had written from his chest and laid it flat in front of the stone window. Chen Pipi looked at the tiny words on the paper with the light of the oil lamp in the cell and frowned slightly. He was indeed the only genius in the academy who had 6 A+ courses. He had memorized the contents of the letter after a few casual glances. It would not be difficult for him to recite the contents of the letter. Ning Ke put the paper back into his chest and asked silently with a smile, "Isn't it awesome?" It was only then that Chenpipi knew that this was the Academy's plan. He could not help but feel that it was ridiculous. But when he thought about it carefully, he felt that it was very reasonable. But in the end, he still shook his head. It had nothing to do with the Academy's plan. He just did not agree with Ning Kei's addition of saving him from the U prison. The more reasonable the Academy's plan was, the more he could not accept that he would disrupt it. Seeing him shake his head, Ning Kei did not say anything and directly raised his middle finger. Chenpipi still shook his head and used his finger to write some words in the air. Ning Kei looked at these words and frowned slightly. He did not understand why he mentioned her. He stretched out his finger and wrote a dirty word in the air outside the window. Chenpipi was a little angry and used his finger to write an even more dirty word. Ning Kei was not angry. The scene at this moment reminded him of the past when he had just entered the academy. He could not help but laugh at the fat man's words in the old library. Time passed so silently and disappeared without a trace. Who would have thought that after so many years, he and Chenpipi would both come to Peach Mountain and start to communicate again inside and outside the precipice. Chenpipi probably also remembered the past. He smiled silently and said, "The food in the U prison is really delicious. If you are interested, you can come in and try it." At this moment, he suddenly heard the sound of the door opening behind him. Then, someone walked into the cell. The smile on his face suddenly disappeared and he raised his eyebrows at Ning Kei outside the window. Ning Kei understood and quickly moved to the side of the precipice. After ensuring that due to the angle of the light, the people in the cell could not see him outside the stone window, he looked at the cell again. When he saw the person who walked into the cell, he could not help but be a little surprised. He did not understand why this person would appear. Chenpipi had not seen the man who walked into the cell, if he did not remember wrongly, but he recognized the silver mask, so he was also a little surprised and puzzled. "If I am not wrong, you should be very low-key in the West Hill Divine Palace now. Why would you break the taboo to see me? And how did you know that I was locked up here? Don't tell me that you have a trusted aide in the judicial department. I know how cold-blooded and powerful that woman is." Long Qing looked at the fat man by the window and said, "You are indeed a genius of Haotian Taoism. You are locked up in the U prison, but you seem to be able to see everything that happens outside. Unfortunately, you are just a piece of trash now." Chenpipi said, "Although I have always been good-tempered, I do have a temper. Even a blind man can see that you are not qualified to call me a piece of trash." Long Qing smiled and said, "Your snow mountain and ocean of qi have been destroyed. What else can you be if not a piece of trash?" Chenpipi's expression did not change. He said with a smile, "Even a piece of trash like you can cultivate again after being pierced by Ning Kei's arrow. Do you think that I, the genius, cannot do it?" Long Qing said, "Even if you can cultivate again, you are still a piece of trash." Chenpipi sighed and said, "It seems that you have been bullied by Ning Kei into a childish disease." Long Qing said, "There is indeed no need to continue such a childish conversation. You are about to be burned to death by the holy fire in the right to light. Why should I humiliate you? I still want to hear why you call me a piece of trash." Chenpipi's expression changed slightly as he stood in front of Long Qing and said. He wanted to block this person from Ning Kei, who was outside the window, and not hear what he was saying. However, his action was too late. Ning Kei heard Long Qing's words clearly. The right to light was the grandest ceremony of the West Hill Divine Palace. It definitely required the highest level of sacrifice. Until today, no one knew what the sacrifice was. Ning Kei only knew tonight that Chenpipi was the sacrifice for the right to light. What awaited him was the endless burning of the holiest Haotian divine light and the most complete death. This sacrifice is really expensive, and heavy. Looking at Chenpipi's broad back in the cell, Ning Kei smiled and thought. Then, he silently cursed the wife of the Grand Secretary Zheng Jing as the most shameless whore in the world. This is chapter 27. By the way, I'll talk about the 27 cups of wine again. The original text of the 6th cup of wine was "The stone path bends, and at the end there is a girl." When I was writing it, I forgot this line. Later on, when I looked at the newly written line about the mountain ghost, I found that the meaning was actually the same. I couldn't help but be somewhat stunned. After 2.5 years, the story or sentence I wanted to write still had some similarities. It was said that authors should try their best to be innovative and change when writing stories. I was indeed trying my best, but now that I thought about it, there were some parts that were really difficult to change. It was probably because I liked the story too much. What I could promise was that I would do my best to write a different plot, and I would do my best to write the details better, just like I did recently. Everyone, please continue to cast your recommendation votes. Good night, and good health. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 862. Why do I call you trash? Long Qing did not know that Chen Pipi casually asked this question to block Ning Kei's sight. He said, "Back then, I was regarded as the divine son of West Hill by the world. It seemed that I was highly valued, but in fact, I always knew that in the eyes of the elders in the West Hill Divine Palace, the future of Haotian Taoism was always on you. Compared to you, I'm nothing, and I believe that in your eyes, I've never existed." This sentence was very true. In the eyes of the deacons and priests of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace, and in the eyes of ordinary believers, Long Qing was the most dazzling person. There were so many Haotian believers in countless Taoist temples, but only a few of them had heard of Long Qing. However, in the eyes of the cultivators who truly understood the secrets of Haotian Taoism, only Chen Pipi was qualified to represent the future of Haotian Taoism. This was because he came from the Jishou Abbey and inherited the Abbey Dean's Taoism skills or bloodline. He had been regarded as a rare genius since he was a child. He could only be compared to the direct descendants of the Academy or the Xiankong Temple. After he was accepted as a disciple of the headmaster of the Academy, this was no longer necessary. Compared with Chen Pipi, who was born with the favor of Haotian, no matter how talented Long Qing was, he was too ordinary. No matter how noble Long Qing's bloodline was, he was still inferior. A few years ago, Long Qing entered Chang'an with the intention of entering the second floor of the academy. Ning Kei once asked Chen Pipi about him. At that time, Long Qing was very famous in the world, but Chen Pipi did not care about him at all. The difference between the two was too big, and it was really hard for him to pay attention to Long Qing. "You are not Yi Hongyu. I don't think I need to pay attention to you." Chen Pipi looked at Long Qing and said. Long Qing said, "You are a peerless genius of Haotian Taoism, and I am just a prince in the mortal world. Naturally, you don't need to pay attention to me. Furthermore, you are indeed the youngest person in the cultivation world to enter the knowing destiny state. However, what puzzles me and makes me laugh is that you have stagnated since then. Not to mention that Yi Hongyu has far surpassed you, you are not even as good as me in terms of states." He possessed an incredible bloodline and experience, and possessed the publicly recognized talent of the Taoist sect, but in the end, he became such a mediocre person. How could it be explained by saying that he was not as good as he was when he was young? This only proves that there's something wrong with your temperament. No matter how much talent you have, you're still trash in the end. Chen Pipi smiled but did not say anything. Long Qing's pale cheeks flushed. He stared into his eyes and said, "I don't understand. Even I can see that there is something wrong with your temperament. Why couldn't those predecessors of Haotian Taoism see it? Why couldn't the Abbey Dean see it? Why couldn't the headmaster see it? Why are you still qualified to be locked up in the U prison so solemnly when you have already become a real waste? Why is it that a useless person like you is qualified to be a sacrifice for the right to light, a sacrifice that Haotian wants? Chen Pipi found it funny and said, I don't think it's an honor for the sacrifice to be burned to death in the right to light. If you think I'm not qualified, please talk to the hierarch quickly. Long Qing suddenly realized that he had lost control of his emotions just now. Looking at this person's amiable face, he did not know why he had spoken out his true feelings. His expression could not help but turn cold. Even if I'm trash, I don't want to hear too much nonsense. Chen Pipi looked at him and spread out his hands. You must have spent a lot of effort to enter the U prison. Did you just want to vent your hatred and jealousy? I don't remember meeting you when I was young. If you have any childhood trauma, I can't take responsibility. Look at that woman, she has never taken responsibility for me. Long Qing had already calmed down. He looked at him and said, I admit that I am a little jealous of you because your cultivation career has been too smooth. People like me have to put in a lot of effort and even suffer a lot to get to where I am now. But you have only reincarnated into a good body and met a good teacher. You can easily get to where you are now. I can't help but be jealous. Chen Pipi comforted him and said, don't think too much about it. I don't want this either. Long Qing looked at the smile on his face and raised his eyebrows slightly. He continued, other than jealousy, I am more angry. I am angry that my teacher has such an unfilial descendant like you. It was only then that Chen Pipi remembered that he was his father's disciple. After a moment of silence, he said, in Chang'an, I have done my best for the academy. Outside the city, I have done my best for my father. I have never owed anyone. Long Qing stared into his eyes and said, my teacher is in a very bad situation now. He is even worse than an ordinary person and needs someone to take care of him. If you can't be filial, then I hope you can help me. Chen Pipi was puzzled and asked, how do you want me to help you? Long Qing said, I went back to the Jishou Abbey, but I couldn't get in. Chen Pipi said helplessly, sometimes, this world has to be reasonable. You can't call me trash so many times and make me really trash. Then, I'll be so idiotic as to believe what you say. Long Qing said, my teacher needs someone to take care of him now. Chen Pipi said, he is the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey. He is supported by countless countries in the human world. Why would he need someone to take care of him? Long Qing said, you know what I mean by taking care of him. Chen Pipi's eyelids drooped slightly and he said, if Haotian does not speak, no one in Haotian Taoism would dare to disrespect the Jishou Abbey. Long Qing found that Chen Pipi was indeed very smart. Although he was inexperienced, he knew exactly what he wanted to say, as if he could see the deepest part of his heart. Long Qing could not help but be vigilant. Any order depends on strength. The reason why the Jishou Abbey can control the West Hill Divine Palace behind the scenes and influence the direction of the world for countless years is because of this. The Green Mountain Anthill was trampled by the headmaster. The strongest power in the abbey dissipated like smoke. The headmaster was seriously injured. It was extremely difficult for the Jishou Abbey to influence Haotian Taoism, not to mention control the Divine Hall. The thousands of Taoist temples and Haotian believers in the human world only knew about the West Hill Divine Palace. How would they know about the existence of Jishou Abbey? Under such circumstances, even if Haotian didn't say anything, did you think that the West Hill Divine Palace, which had been suppressed for countless years, wouldn't have some ideas? Do you think the Lord Headmaster is willing to remember the days when he was teacher's dog? If there is no one to take care of him, can the grass huts by the lake withstand the wind and rain? Long Qing looked at Chen Pipi and said honestly, I know that my current state and strength is not enough to restore the Jishou Abbey to its former glory. But whether it is my brother Chong Ming of the Yen Kingdom or the cavalry of the wilderness, they can all give me strength. Otherwise, I would have been forced to leave Peach Mountain long ago. I think this should be some kind of proof. Chen Pipi looked at his eyes quietly and said, he was seriously injured in Chang'an City. His state and cultivation are all gone. Even if Haotian takes pity on him, he can't save him. Long Qing understood that Chen Pipi's words were to remind him that if he went to the Jishou Abbey to use the Grey Eye's skill to seize the Abbey Dean's power, it was destined to be in vain. A faint chill rose. He felt that Chen Pipi's seemingly simple eyes suddenly became extremely complicated. Then, it seemed to fall into the deepest part of his soul. He could only remain silent. 7 in and 13 out, Chen Pipi suddenly said. Long Qing was slightly stunned and asked, "What do you mean?" Chen Pipi looked at him and said with a smile, "This is the way to enter the abbey." If you can't understand this sentence, it can only mean that you will never be able to catch up with a useless person like me. Long Qing got the answer he wanted and left the cell. Chen Pipi turned around and looked out of the stone window. Ning Kei's face appeared outside the window. He looked at Chen Pipi and asked a few words silently. Chen Pipi smiled and shook his head. Ning Kei raised his middle finger again. Chen Pipi refused to say another word. He turned around and faced Ning Kei with his broad back and butt. Then, he raised his right hand high above his head and raised his middle finger. Ning Kei stood on the precipice and looked at the back of his senior brother through the stone window. He was silent for a long time and pulled the rope. The big black horse on the cliff above felt the movement of the rope and retreated. Ning Kei followed it on the precipice and gradually separated from the stone window. The right to light was the grandest and highest standard sacrificial ceremony of Haotian Taoism. It could only be held when Haotian sent a miracle to the human world. The human world had not seen Haotian's miracle for many years, so the right to light had not been held for many years. Even the most knowledgeable priest of the Revelation Department of the West Hill Divine Palace was not very clear about the requirements and process of the sacrificial ceremony. Ning Kei had no knowledge in this area. After leaving the U prison on the precipice and returning to the Revelation Institute, he stayed in the book hall to read the classics. Finally, he found some relevant content in an extremely thick book about the ceremony and confirmed that the right to light did require sacrifices. Those sacrifices could be a sword, a sheep, or a blade of grass. However, these sacrifices must contain the purest faith. Sometimes they were even the original objects of Haotian's miracle, so they were extremely rare. As time passed, the shadow of the everlasting night slowly approached. The faith in the world of Haotian gradually showed signs of decline. It was extremely difficult to find such a sacrifice. If one looked at the requirements of the sacrifice, the sword of the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, might be the most suitable. However, the faith of the strongest man in the world towards Haotian was a shallow question mark. Perhaps the old yellow bull of the academy was qualified, but the West Hill Divine Palace did not dare to have such ambitions. Ning Kei collected a lot of information through various channels and finally confirmed that the sacrifice for the right to light was indeed Chen Pipi. According to the secret rumors, the reason why the West Hill Divine Palace used him as a sacrifice was not only because he was a recognized genius of Haotian Taoism and a disciple of the second floor of the academy. The most important thing was that his father was the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey. His mother was the descendant of the great divine priest of light who had left Peach Mountain for the South Sea 600 years ago and disappeared. The identity of the successor of the academy meant that he had betrayed Haotian. However, he had the noblest blood of Haotian Taoism in the world. Was there a more suitable sacrifice than such a pure traitor? Moreover, the West Hill Divine Palace thought that when the Peach Mountain was set on fire and Chen Pipi was about to be burned to ashes, could the academy turn a blind eye? Could Ning Kei continue to sit in Chang'an peacefully? Ning Kei felt a chill when he imagined the fat man being burned to ashes. He looked at the divine hall of light on the peak and thought, "Do you really want him to die? Do you really want me to die? The plot is a bit awkward." I discussed it with my friends for a long time. Then I thought hard in the wind for a long time when I was walking the dog. I am very happy that I have figured it out. I will resume 2 chapters tomorrow. Have a good weekend and enjoy your reading. I am very happy now. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 863. If Ning Ke, who was in the Peach Mountain, could find out what the sacrifice for the right to light was, the Tang Empire, which had countless intelligence systems, naturally knew about it too, or even before him. But now he could only think about how to deal with the right to light by himself. He had basically confirmed that the news was deliberately released by the Westhill Divine Palace. The Divine Hall wanted to force the people from the Academy, especially him, out of Chang'an, because the Divine Hall always thought that he was still in Chang'an, which was a problem the Divine Hall could not solve. The reason why he was so angry at the Divine Hall of Light was because he was very sure that it was the woman in the Divine Hall of Light who had chosen Chen Pipi. The right to light was for Haotian, and since Haotian was in the human world now, it was up to Haotian to decide the sacrifice. Ning Ke had mixed feelings. Many years ago, after killing Yen Suqing, he was attacked by the Vermilion Bird Talisman on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. Thanks to the protection of the big black umbrella, he did not die on the spot. If not for Chen Pipi's help after escaping into the old library of the Academy and eating a precious heavenly power pill, he would not have survived. Luckily, his snow mountain and ocean of qi were rebuilt, and the loser who could not cultivate finally set foot on the road of cultivation. In other words, Chen Pipi had really changed his fate. Although he did not say anything in the following days, he had never forgotten about it. He had specially told Sang Sang to remember that he owed Chen Pipi his life. The reason was that he valued this matter very much and was afraid that he would forget it. So he asked Sang Sang, who never forgot important things, to remember it for him. But now it seemed that she had long forgotten about it. That night, Ning Ke sneaked down the precipice again and scolded the woman in the Divine Hall of Light by the stone window to show his firm stand on the matter of clothes and limbs. Then he took out the revised plan during the day and kept explaining to the stone window. But he had to stop after a short while. Because Chen Pipi did not want to listen, he did not even turn around. He only faced Ning Ke's pale face outside the stone window. Since he could not see Ning Ke's mouth and the words on the letter, he naturally could not hear it. Chen Pipi expressed his firm objection with silence. His snow mountain and ocean of qi had been locked. In Long Qing's words, he had become a waste. Then why should his senior brothers and sisters at the back of the mountain of the Academy take risks for him? Why should he let his junior brother Ning Ke risk his life for him? Ning Ke looked at his broad back. After a moment of silence, he once again stuck out his middle finger and said in a hoarse voice, "Do you think it looks good to burn you into a pile of fat?" Ning Ke could use the skills of the Buddhism sect that he had learned from Master Qishan and the moonlight sprinkled by his teacher to deal with the tactical array on the precipice. However, with his current cultivation state, it was impossible to break the precipice and rescue Chen Pipi from the U prison. When Chen Pipi turned around, he could not even make him listen to him. Therefore, if he did not want to see Chen Pipi die, he had to choose another method. No matter where they were, the disciples of the Academy would always ask for help when they encountered an unsolvable problem. Because to them, the Academy was like Haotian to the believers. It seemed omniscient and omnipotent. Although Ning Ke and the others had become the source of the Academy's confidence after the headmaster of the Academy ascended to heaven, he still wanted the opinions of his senior brothers out of habit. Ning Ke left the Revelation Institute and walked across the stone bridge over the stream. He came back to the small town and handed the letter to the old sweet potato seller to the old man, hoping to get a reply as soon as possible. "I don't know what you are going to do. Just be careful, the old sweet potato seller said. Ning Kai said, since I have come to Peach Mountain, I have never thought of going back alive. Or rather, I have never thought of going back alone. And I don't believe that anything will happen to me. After finishing his business, he held 2 sweet potatoes and walked out of the town. The sweet potatoes had just come out of the oven and were extremely hot. Although he was not afraid of the heat, he kept changing his hands to avoid attracting attention. It looked a little funny. A horse carriage came. He looked at the girl in white in front of the carriage and remembered that he had met this carriage on the day of the thunderstorm. After passing by, he subconsciously looked back and saw that the girl in the carriage was still tall and fat. He could not help but have some malicious guesses and felt inexplicably happy. In the middle of the night, he dived to the bottom of the cliff again. The big black horse was still doing hard work on the cliff plateau. He hung in front of the stone window and kept trying to persuade Chun Pippi in the cell. However, Chun Pippi still did not turn around. Since he could not hear the sound, Chun Pippi could completely ignore him. The most important thing to be a man is to have confidence. I know what you are worried about, but what's there to worry about? The headmaster is looking at us from heaven. You don't even dare to try? Aren't you afraid that you will anger the old man to death? What if he is fighting with Haotian when he is angry and gets beaten up by Haotian when he is distracted? The headmaster said that you can easily enter the knowing destiny state because you are optimistic. But where is your optimism now? Is it because you are fat again that you feel inferior? Is that why you don't want to see others? You are so useless. I saw a rich girl these days. She is not married yet, but she is fatter than you. Taller than second brother. She looks like she is pregnant before marriage. But how can she feel inferior at all? She wandered around the world with her maidservant all day long. She bought a lot of high-calorie food like roasted sweet potatoes. That is a lot of them. Do you know how many there are? Even the starving people in Hebei County can be fed like pigs. But she just doesn't care at all. Look at what kind of style is that. That is confidence. Dangerous clouds and mist floated between the quiet cliffs. Ning Kai climbed the stone window like a herbalist and talked earnestly to the window. Although Chun Pippi still refused to turn around and could not hear what he said, he became more and more excited. He could not help but laugh when he thought of the fat girl. There were no traces of human beings between the cliffs for thousands of years. The West Hill Divine Palace did not have any surveillance here, so he could speak freely. Even if his voice was carried by the wind, it was even softer than the rustling of leaves when it reached the divine halls on the peak. Even the powerhouses above the 5 states could not hear it. So Ning Kai was very relieved. But he had long forgotten that the woman in the divine hall of light was not human. Sang Sang stood on the balcony behind the divine hall of light, looking at the ridiculous scene in the abyss below and listening to the ridiculous words of the ridiculous man. She frowned slightly. On the smooth floor behind her, a small pile of sweet potatoes was neatly stacked. Not far away was the leftover sweet potato skin. She was still holding a cold sweet potato in her hand. The sacred and solemn divine hall of light was now filled with wine urns, food, and sweet potatoes. Even though those things, including the garbage, were all neatly arranged and full of cold lines, they were still food. No matter how cold and tidy they were, they still had a unique taste of the human world. This was also the reason why she became extremely angry after hearing Ning Kai's words on the cliffs. In her eyes, there were countless stars being destroyed and countless seas being burned. The extremely strong willpower swept the whole world in the form of anger, as if it was going to burn everything. Different from the previous 2 times, tonight her anger did not change the color of heaven and earth, nor did it attract thousands of thunder. That was because she had learned how to control emotions. For cultivators or human beings, learning to control emotions was undoubtedly a very good thing. But for her, it was not necessarily a good thing. Because from another perspective, it meant that she had now begun to get used to the emotional things in her consciousness, which she should not have been used to. Only human beings needed such useless derivatives as emotions. She was the rule of this world. She was objective, so she was cold. She would never be happy because of external things, nor would she feel sad. When she began to constantly have feelings of hatred, anger, or other emotions, or even began to get used to these emotions, what would happen? The sweet potato in her hand had become cold, just like the world and that kind of life she was used to. She raised the sweet potato in her hand and took a bite. She found that the feeling from her lips and tongue was very uncomfortable. She knew that it was not delicious. After all, sweet potatoes were only delicious when they were hot. She looked at the bright moon in the night sky, silent as usual. Her slender eyes slightly squinted, like willow leaves that were folded by the wind by the Yanming Lake. She was Haotian who was left in the human world. Her aura gradually became turbid. She wanted to return to the world she was familiar with and live the life she was familiar with. However, the door of the divine kingdom had been destroyed and blocked by the bright moon. It blocked her way back, and now she could not open the passage by herself. The West Hill Divine Palace held the right to light to try to open the way for her to return to the divine kingdom of Haotian. The reason why they chose Chun Pipi was that his blood was the purest and contained the most devout faith to her for countless generations. Moreover, he was the most beloved student of the bright moon. She looked at the bright moon and imagined what she would do after returning to the divine kingdom. She felt satisfied, but suddenly remembered that there were no sweet potatoes in the divine kingdom, no matter whether they were hot or cold. She suddenly came to her senses and became more and more vigilant. She glanced at the sweet potato in her hand that was subconsciously reheated by the divine flame. She frowned in disgust and threw it out of the balcony. The divine hall of light was on the peak, and below it were 3 cliff plateaus. Below the 3 cliff plateaus was the U prison on the precipice. The sweet potato did not fall into the abyss, but fell on the 3rd cliff plateau. Ning Ke, who was on the precipice, was lucky to escape the fate of being the first person in history to be killed by a sweet potato. The big black horse was shocked by the sweet potato that fell in front of him. It looked at the flesh of the sweet potato that was split open, looked at the heat that seeped out, and smelled the fragrance of the sweet potato. It thought of the miserable fate of working for Ning Ke every night and not even having a midnight snack. It could not help but shed tears of gratitude and kept thanking Haotian for her gift. I wish my friends in the earthquake area a safe journey. The title and content of this chapter are not bad. I have seen too much news and Weibo today, and my eyes are a little dazzled. I will write the 2nd chapter after a break. I will try to update it before 3 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 864. Nothing in the world could be kept a secret forever. On the contrary, the word secret would spread faster. Just as Ning Ke had expected, Chang'an had received information about the right to light even before he did. They knew that Chun Pipi was going to be burned to death. The right to light had not been held for many years. There were so many books in the library cave at the back of the mountain of the academy, but there were very few records about it. Therefore, people could not understand why the West Hill Divine Palace wanted to use Chun Pipi as a sacrifice. However, they knew the hidden danger in this matter. Haotian Taoism was using Chun Pipi's life to force the people of the academy to leave Chang'an. Of course, their biggest target was Ning. Quebec. Rare materials from the counties of the Tang Empire were still being sent to the palace. The heavy black horse carriage was still parked in the palace. All the information proved that Ning Ke was still in the palace, working with eldest brother to repair the god-stunning array. How could he watch Chun Pipi die? The people at the back of the mountain of the academy knew where Ning Ke had gone. However, they did not know what decision Ning Ke would make due to the long distance. They could not keep waiting. Before Ning Ke's letter reached Chang'an, someone in the back of the mountain had already made his decision without even thinking about it. Eldest brother looked at the young and cute girl in front of the hall. He looked at the pair of old leather boots on her feet and the blood-red broadsword in her hand that looked more like an iron rod. After thinking for a while, he said, "Your teacher is not in Chang'an, so I can't restrict you. But I want you to understand what this decision means." Yu Lian left the academy quietly. Only Tang Xiaotang knew where she went. She knew that she could not wait for her teacher or brother. She said respectfully and firmly, "Eldest uncle, I understand what you mean. However, if I don't go and see, I will not feel at ease." There were many small stones in her boots and dust on her clothes. For the past 6 months, she had been cutting stone steps on the precipice of the back of the mountain of the academy. Whether her teacher was there or not, she had been squatting on the steep stone steps, sweating and fighting tirelessly with the iron rod in her hand against the hard rocks. When they were on the snow cliff in the wilderness, her strength was similar to Yi Hongyu's. Now Yi Hongyu was a grand cultivator at the peak of the knowing destiny state, while she seemed to be stuck at that level. It was not because she lacked talent, but because the cultivation of the devil's doctrine and that of Haotian Taoism were very different. Yu Lian made her jump into the waterfall continuously and suffer continuously. This was the homework that the teacher assigned to the student, and it was also the training that the leader of the devil's doctrine gave to the junior. After years of diligent learning and cruel training, the spirit of this girl from the devil's doctrine had been tempered to an unimaginable level. However, there was still no qualitative change in her state, because she still needed an opportunity to release her accumulation. Tang Xiaotang thought that this was the opportunity for her to improve her realm. She wanted to go to Peach Mountain, she wanted to see Chen Pipi, and she would have to face countless dangerous battles. For the cultivators of the devil's doctrine, battles were the only way to improve their strength. Only real fierce battles could cultivate the truly powerful. She was going to be the most powerful woman in the world, so she was never afraid of battle. But when she said goodbye to the academy, she did not think that even if she became as powerful as Yi Hongyu, she would not be able to break into the Peach Mountain to save Chen Pipi. Even if she could find the true meaning of being a powerhouse in battle, she would not be greeted by the shocked eyes of the cultivation world, but a cold death. None of that mattered. As she said before, what she sought was peace of mind and battle. If she did not dare to fight, how could she have peace of mind? Eldest brother looked at her, as if he was looking at the third sister who came to the academy with their teacher many years ago. She loved wearing green dresses and had a pair of frighteningly mature eyes. "If you encounter anything, listen to your youngest uncle," he ordered. "If youngest uncle makes sense, I will listen to him," Tang Xiaotang said. She put away the iron rod, dusted herself, and kicked off the gravel on her boots. Then she left Chang'an and went to the West Hill Divine Kingdom and that stupid fat man. There was wind on the sea, and then waves. The blue sea water kept stirring, looking very uneasy. So there were many uneasy clouds in the blue sky that reflected the color of the sea water. A black wooden ship broke through the waves from the depths of the sea. None of the fishermen on the shore or the laborers on the docks could see clearly where the black ship had been. They couldn't help but have an abnormally strong feeling, as if the black ship had suddenly leapt out of the sea from the netherworld. The black ship slowly approached the shore, and the women selling water and food kept shouting. The strange feeling was not as important as survival. But there was no response from the ship. After a while, more than 10 people walked down from the black ship, carrying water and food in their hands, and began to distribute them to the poor on the shore. There were men and women, old and young. The common characteristic was that their skin was very dark, and they wore the common wide-brimmed bamboo hats. They were no different from the fishermen on the South Sea. But what was particularly eye-catching, or rather, glaring, was that they were all wearing red divine robes. The people on the shore were not wrong. The style of the divine robes was a little old, and the cloth looked a little old. But the insignia that no one dared to forge was absolutely real. Compared to the ordinary divine robes of the West Hill Divine Palace, the only difference was probably the black ribbon around their waists. The difference between the divine priests and deacons in the West Hill Divine Palace was very strict. The red-robed divine priest was a very important figure, especially in the secular world. Usually, a small country would have a red-robed divine priest, and the great river kingdom that the town belonged to only had 3 red-robed divine priests. And the dozen or so men and women who looked like fishermen were all wearing real red divine robes. Could it be that they were all red-robed divine officials? How could there be so many bigwigs in the remote South Sea? The people in the town found it hard to believe. What was even more unbelievable was that these red-robed divine priests actually condescended to personally distribute food to the poor. When had the divine priests in the divine hall ever done such a thing? The news that more than a dozen red-robed divine priests appeared in the South Sea town quickly spread throughout the Great River Kingdom. When the king of the Great River Kingdom and the representative of the Black Ink Garden rushed to the seaside day and night, they found that the red-robed divine priests had already left, and no one knew where they went. These red-robed divine priests, who looked like fishermen, began to silently walk north after landing on the shore. They purposely chose remote paths to walk, and sometimes directly crossed the mountains and forests, as if they were worried about disturbing the ordinary people. They stayed overnight by the stream and ate the small salted fish they brought with them. Even if they wanted to ask the people for rice, they would pay. Even if they met the most devout Hautian believers on the road, they would not accept the gold and silver offered by the other party. Although they wore divine robes, they were not similar to the arrogant divine priests in the West Hill Divine Palace. Instead, they were more like the ascetic monks in the Ueluan kingdom, walking silently with pride. One day, these people came to the Xiaoming Lake not far from the Black Ink Garden to take a rest. A young girl raised her head, looked at the beautiful Mogan Mountain, and said, "Is this the legendary Black Ink Garden?" Probably because they fished in the South Sea all year round and were exposed to the wind and sun, these people in red divine robes all had very dark skin, and a little rough. This young girl was very young, and her skin was relatively light and smoother. Her eyebrows were thick and straight like knives, revealing a healthy and strong aura. A tall and thin middle-aged man said, "Yes." The young girl looked at the looming pavilion in the Mogan Mountain and said, "When I was a child, I heard from my uncle that there was a famous divine talisman master here. A few days ago, I heard that his female disciple had also become a divine talisman master. It seems to be a good sect. Should we destroy the Black Ink Garden along the way?" The divine talisman master was an extremely powerful existence in the cultivation world. Even in the West Hill Divine Palace, he had a very high status. It was not easy to defeat a divine talisman master, not to mention that the Black Ink Garden had the master of calligrapher and now Mo Shanshan. The young girl looked only 17 or 18 years old, but she actually said that she would destroy the Black Ink Garden along the way. Even if she had started cultivating in her mother's womb and could sense the initial awareness state before she was born, there was no reason for her to make such a bold statement. What was more incredible was that when she said that she would destroy the Black Ink Garden along the way, her expression was so normal and natural, as if she was just talking about who should sleep in which tent tonight. If other cultivators heard the words of the young girl, they might be shocked speechless, but it was more likely that they would laugh at her shamelessly. However, the people by the lake did not show any strange expression, as if it was a matter of course for them to destroy the Black Ink Garden. Some of them even looked at the young girl with a doting expression, as if they would immediately go to the Black Ink Garden as long as she was willing. The tall and thin middle-aged man looked at the young girl and shook his head. He said, "Little you, don't mess around. Now we have something important to do. Let's go back to Peach Mountain first. Hearing the words, "Go back to Peach Mountain," the young man's dark face became happy and proud. Even the most taciturn old man smiled. The Right to Light was the grandest sacrificial ceremony in the West Hill Divine Palace and the grandest festival in the world of Haotian. The last Right to Light was so far away that it had left people's memory. Today's Right to Light undoubtedly attracted the attention of all believers, and also welcomed the most distinguished guests in the world. Offerings from various countries were continuously sent to the West Hill Divine Kingdom. Although those rare treasures were not qualified to be the main offerings of the Right to Light, they were enough to satisfy the Divine Hall. Some of the most devout believers of Haotian came to the West Hill Divine Kingdom after hearing the news of the Right to Light. They had been worshipping the mountain since spring. Other than these people, the House of Red Sleeves and other dance troupes from Chang'an were the first batch of people to participate in the Right to Light. They were arranged by the Divine Hall to practice dancing and etiquette every day. Most importantly, their singing and dancing performances had to go through a lot of tests. A letter from Chang'an was sent to the garden, and then to the sweet potato shop in the small town. Then it was brought back to the book hall of the Revelation Institute by Ning Quebec. After reading the letter personally written by eldest brother, he did not do anything else. He did not go to the precipice to see Chen Pippi. Just like everyone else in the world, he quietly waited for the Right to Light. Chapter 865. In order to participate in the Right to Light, countless believers of Haotian poured into the West Hill Divine Kingdom from all over the world. Envoys from various countries arrived one after another. They were arranged by the Divine Hall to stay in the gardens and halls around the Peach Mountain. Those with high status were arranged to stay in the Revelation Institute. Lu Yiqing represented the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom. Ning Ke stood on the cliff and looked at the blind swordsman who was brought into the Revelation Institute by Priest Moli. He recalled the battle outside the Academy's side gate years ago and could not help but feel a little emotional. Lu Yiqing had been a nobody in the first half of his cultivation career. He only became famous after he was summoned back to the Sword Garret. Many people thought highly of his talent in swordsmanship. Second brother even said that if he did not miss the opportunity, he could possibly reach the level of his brother, the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai. Lu Bai also thought highly of him and asked him to challenge the Academy's disciples who had entered the human realm in Chang'an to sharpen his mind. He did not hesitate to lose to gain something. However, the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace did something and the challenge became a battle of life and death. Ning Ke, who broke out of seclusion, blinded him. An ordinary cultivator would not be able to recover from such a heavy setback. However, Lu Yiqing lived up to Lu Bai's expectations and second brother's comments. After he was blinded, he cultivated in the Sword Garret for several years. His cultivation state and mind improved by leaps and bounds, and he entered the knowing destiny state like a sword cutting through bamboo. From this point of view, his eyes being blinded by Ning Ke might be the so-called opportunity that second brother had once mentioned. During the battle in the Verdant Canyon, Lu Bai had chopped off the second brother's right arm and suffered serious injuries. He had returned to the Sword Garret to recuperate. Now, Lu Yiqing was in charge of the affairs of the Sword Garret. It was rumored that the Sword Garret had killed the emperor of the South Jin Kingdom in a fit of rage. Ning Ke had met Cheng Jiqing, a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state of the Sword Garret in the Lank Temple. However, he was not in the Sword Garret today. It seemed that Lu Yiqing's position in the Sword Garret had been stabilized. He was still puzzled because the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, did not come. Although it was rumored that he had not recovered, the Right to Light was a big event. As a visiting professor of the Divine Hall, Lu Bai should be there in person. Then, Ning Ke saw the delegation from the Golden Tribe Royal Court. The delegation of the Golden Tribe Royal Court only had one carriage. In the carriage sat an old man with wrinkles all over his face. The carriage was not pulled by a horse, but by a strong grassland man with muscles as hard as stone. He looked extremely shabby. However, after knowing the identity of the two, no one felt that the scale was shabby anymore, because the old man in the cotton shirt in the carriage was the most respected national master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, Master Bao Ding, and the strong grassland man pulling the carriage was General Lebu, the #1 martial arts master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Even if there were only two of them, it was enough to show the Golden Tribe Royal Court's respect for the divine halls of West Hill and the importance they attached to the right to light. What shocked the divine halls the most was that the national master of the Golden Tribe and Lebu came to West Hill directly through Tang instead of going around Yueluan. Ning Ke had met the nation master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court in the wilderness and knew how unfathomable this seemingly ordinary old man's state was. He did not even dare to look at this old man. The Yen Kingdom's diplomatic corps had also arrived. Emperor Chongming, who had just ascended the throne at the beginning of the year, had abandoned the heavy state affairs and arrived with hundreds of attendants. Then, the representatives of the Buddhism sect arrived as well. Monk Guanhai, the abbot of the Lank Temple, came alone. Monk Wu Dao was nowhere to be found. Many iron staff ascetic monks from the White Tower Temple also came. What made Ning Ke most wary was that the Xiankong Temple in the distant West Wilderness had also sent a representative. It was Qi Nian, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect. The noblest royal family and the most powerful cultivators had all arrived at the West Hill Divine Kingdom to participate in the Right to Light. The scale of the event and the grandeur of the rules far exceeded the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival at the Lank Temple. Only the Tang Empire did not send an official delegation. The House of Red Sleeves did not send anyone, and neither did the Academy. The war had just ended. Many people could understand why the Tang Empire and the Academy did not send anyone to the Right to Light. However, they could not understand why they did not hear anything from the Jishou Abbey even though the Xiankong Temple, the unknown place of the Buddhism sect, had sent a representative. One must know that the mysterious Daoist temple was the Daoist sect's unknown place. Many people came to the West Hill Divine Palace. Some waited in the West Hill Divine Palace, while others chose to leave because there was nothing they wanted there. That person was Prince Long Qing. Long Qing left the Peach Mountain and headed for the Jishou Abbey. As the mysterious unknown place, not many people knew where the Daoist temple was in the deep mountains, even in the West Hill Divine Palace. However, he had once lived in the Daoist temple for a long time, so he naturally knew the way back. The Jishou Abbey was in the West Hill Divine Kingdom. It was not far from the Peach Mountain where the Divine Hall was located. There were several steep peaks in between. When the weather was good, one could even see the Divine Hall in the sunlight from the abbey. Long Qing turned his gaze from the Divine Hall and looked at the ordinary and even shabby Taoist door in front of him. Just like the last time he came, the wooden door of the Daoist temple was still tightly shut, and no sound could be heard from inside. The Jishou Abbey was the unknown place of Taoist sect, so it was naturally not as ordinary and shabby as it looked. There was an extremely powerful Taoist divine array in the abbey. When the array was activated, one could not climb over the walls or through the windows. One could only enter through the door of the abbey. When the door was closed, no one could enter or leave. The Taoist temple would then become a prison, with the sky as the cover and the ground as the paving. No one could escape. After the Jishou Abbey appeared in the human world, no one other than the headmaster of the academy could easily break into it. Last autumn, when the eldest brother of the academy and the abbey dean fought with the distanceless state, they had come here and left instantly. They were not imprisoned by the big array in the Jishou Abbey. However, that did not mean that the eldest brother's state was enough to ignore the big array. It was because someone who understood the array very well had tampered with it in advance. That person was Chen Pipi, who had lived in the Jishou Abbey since he was a child. Long Qing knew about this, so he took the risk to enter the U prison to see Chen Pipi. He wanted to know how to enter the Jishou Abbey. Chen Pipi told him that the way to enter the Jishou Abbey was 7 in and 13 out. Long Qing did not know what these 5 words meant. After thinking about it for the past few days, he guessed that the 7 in referred to the 7 huts by the lake where the tomes of arcane were placed. They represented the 7 passages of the array, and the so-called 13 out referred to the 13 gates of the array of life and death. He did not know much about the array, but he had courage and determination. Looking at the stone steps in front of the abbey, he took a deep breath and walked up. He stretched out his hand and pushed the door. Before his palm could land on the door, an incomparably majestic aura instantly occupied his body and mind. Numerous streaks of black blood flowed from his nostrils and eyes. He had actually suffered extremely heavy injuries without a sound. If he had not been a heartless person, he would have been dead by now. Long Qing retreated to the bottom of the stone steps and looked at the ordinary wooden door. His face became abnormally pale. He did not expect to enter the Jishou Abbey in one go, but he did not expect the array to be so terrifying. After a moment of silence, he left the abbey and went around to the back of the Taoist abbey. He looked at the grey stone walls that were not high, but he did not have the courage to climb them. Then he saw the Green Mountain behind the abbey. Long Qing was very familiar with the Green Mountain. He had traveled back and forth between the Taoist temple and the Green Mountain countless times. He had walked through the caves in the cliff that looked like ant nests. He knew that the reason why the mountain looked green was because the surface of the cliff was covered with dense green vines. He knew that there were many terrible people living in it. The Green Mountain had collapsed and turned into a mound that was more than 100 feet high. It was covered with green grass and looked like an old grave that had not been taken care of for many years. Long Qing looked at the Green Mountain and noticed that the top was very flat. It gave people the feeling that a giant had stretched out a foot from the sky and directly stepped on the original Green Mountain into its current state. The ant nest-like caves in the Green Mountain had long disappeared. The peerless powerhouses of Haotian Taoism who had once lived in those caves had all turned into ashes in the big tomb. Recalling the torture he had suffered in those caves, the power he had felt, the half-man Taoist was so powerful that it was hard to describe. Long Qing could not believe what he had seen and was shocked speechless. No matter how much he hated those old Taoists, they still represented the power of Haotian Taoism. That experience had always been the source of his pride and confidence. However, in front of this miraculous scene, how laughable was his pride and confidence. Long Qing returned to the Jishou Abbey and sat cross-legged. It took him a long time to get over the shock in his heart and calm his somewhat dispirited heart. He began to continue thinking about Chen Pipi's words. 7 in and 13 out, what did it mean? He thought hard for a night and only opened his eyes again when the morning light came. The moss-covered stone steps came into view again. He suddenly noticed that there were a total of 6 steps in front of the abbey. 13 minus 7 was 6. Long Qing stood up after a moment of silence and walked to the stone steps. He turned around and walked backwards up 6 steps, down 6 steps, and then back up 7 steps. There were only 6 steps in front of the abbey. After 7 steps, his back should have hit the wooden door. However, he did not hit anything because he had already entered the Jishou Abbey. Advancing was advancing. Knowing the masculinity and defending the femininity was the Jishou Abbey. Knowing when to advance, defending when to retreat. Only by retreating could one enter the Jishou Abbey. 7 in and 13 out, perhaps this was what it meant. Long Qing walked into the Jishou Abbey and walked along the familiar lake. He came to the familiar house. Before he knocked on the door opened. A middle-aged Taoist looked at Long Qing and said, "You came faster than I thought." Long Qing bowed to the middle-aged Taoist and said, "Greetings, uncle." The middle-aged Taoist waved his hand and said, "Go in." Long Qing obeyed and walked into the room. He smelled a faint stench, which came from the person on the bed. He had smelled it before in the black wind in the south of Chang'an City. Looking at the person on the bed, he felt a little complicated. However, his expression did not change. He walked to the bed and knelt down with his forehead on the ground. He said, "I am useless. Please punish me, master. I will try to finish the next chapter before 2 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 866. The person on the couch was the Abbey Dean. He used to be invincible, but now he was plagued by evil. He looked like an ordinary old man who was about to die, but his eyes were still so calm, as if he could see through everything. Long Qing knelt in front of the couch and did not dare to look up. He felt that all his thoughts could not be hidden. "I am not as good as the headmaster, and you are not as good as Ning Quebec. This is natural." The Abbey Dean looked at him and said in a weak voice. There were many pauses in just a few words. Long Qing looked up and did not dare to look into his eyes, nor did he dare to look at the deep or shallow knife marks on his face. His eyes fell on the layout of the quiet room. It was a very simple quiet room, similar to the prison cells in the U prison in Peach Mountain. What surprised him was that he did not feel any inhibition in the Jishou Abbey. The Abbey Dean looked at the expression on his face and knew what he was thinking. He smiled and said, "In Chang'an, I understood the word tranquility and rejected the will of Haotian at that moment. That was extremely disrespectful, so Haotian didn't let me die. Instead, he let me experience this pain with my life." "You're right. There is no inhibition in the Abbey, only the will of Haotian. I'm like a prisoner now. If I can't reflect on my mistakes, I may leave, but I don't know what will happen to me after I leave." The big tactical array in the Jishou Abbey could stop outsiders from entering and leaving, but it could not stop Chen Mao from entering and leaving. Haotian did not place any restrictions on him. His restrictions came from his respect for Haotian and his regret for the mistakes he had made. This lack of restrictions was the greatest torture. Enduring the stench of the bed, Long Qing said humbly, "I will accompany you to take care of you. After you recover, you can at least go to the lakeside." The Abbey Dean said, "I thought that your eyes would immediately turn gray when you entered the room. I did not expect you to be much more patient than before. There was only one skill in the world that could turn a cultivator's eyes gray. It was the gray eyes Taoism skill recorded in the Sha hand scroll of the tomes of arcane and originated from the practice of Tao Tai of the Devil's Doctrine." Long Qing knelt down again and said in a trembling voice, "How dare I have such a rebellious idea?" The Abbey Dean looked at him and said with a smile, "Half-man Taoist was half a master to you. Didn't you suck him dry? The word treason is the most suitable word to describe you." Long Qing clearly knew that the Abbey Dean was now a cripple and that he could kill him with just a finger. However, he still did not dare to raise his head in fear. It was not because Chen Pipi had told him in the U prison that the Abbey Dean no longer had any psyche power and that it was useless to use the gray eyes. It was because he was really afraid. Back then, on the shores of the South Sea, he had already decided to be an ordinary merchant and live the life of an ordinary person. However, when he saw that wooden boat on the surface of the sea, he finally understood his unwillingness. A black peach blossom grew on the side of the wooden boat, gently trembling in the slightly fishy sea breeze. He had learned from the Abbey Dean and was sent back to the Jishou Abbey. He had a series of adventures and finally recovered his power. A black peach blossom also grew on his chest, covering the hole that Ning Ke had pierced through. For him, meeting the Abbey Dean on the shores of the South Sea was the greatest lucky chance of his life. However, it was also from that day onwards that the black peach blossom on his chest could only tremble in the wind of the South Sea. He had indeed thought of using the grey eyes to directly devour the Abbey Dean's cultivation state. Even though Chen Pipi had seen through his plan, he still wanted to try it after entering the Jishou Abbey. However, when he knelt in front of the couch, he realized that those thoughts were delusional. He had the courage to suck the half-moon Taoist dry, but he did not have the courage to look at the Abbey Dean. "You disappoint me." The Abbey Dean looked at him and sighed. Long Qing lowered his head even more and did not dare to reply. "Do you know why I took you as my disciple back then? It was not because of your talent. Although you were known for your talent in cultivation in the secular world, you should know very well that there are many people who are more talented than you in the abbey, the school, and the second floor. It was also not because of your will and determination. You gave up after being shot by Ning Ke and became a cripple. Have you ever thought about what Ning Ke's state of mind was like when he could not cultivate?" The Abbey Dean looked at his pale cheeks and said with pity, "I chose you because I thought I saw the destruction and madness in your bones. I thought you would do anything to achieve your goal, no matter cruel or rebellious. You don't have a heart, so you don't have love. You don't have love, so you are fearless and disrespectful. That's why you can ignore all rules and see the threshold of the lawless realm. When you used the grey eyes to absorb the half-moon Taoist, killing everywhere and committing all kinds of evil in the wilderness, I was actually very gratified. Because at that time, you still seemed to have countless possibilities. But today, you don't dare to look up at me. I am disappointed in you not because you once thought of deceiving your master and killing me, but because you still have fear even though you do not have a heart. You have such a good opportunity but you do not grasp it." After hearing these words, Long Qing was soaked in cold sweat. He said in a hoarse voice, "That is because I still want to learn from you. I thought I could become strong enough this way." The Abbey Dean said expressionlessly, "I am already a cripple. What else can you learn from me?" Long Qing raised his head with difficulty and said, "You still have wisdom as vast as the ocean." The Abbey Dean thought of the thousands of knives in Chang'an and said indifferently, "Wisdom is not as mysterious as people think. It is just the way of doing things. Compared to absolute power, sometimes it seems very weak." Long Qing said, "I still have power now, and I will have more and more power. That is why I want to obtain your wisdom and learn how to use these powers." The Abbey Dean looked at him quietly and said, "After you learn these powers, what will you do?" Long Qing looked at the knife marks on the Abbey Dean's face and said, "I want to challenge Ning Quebec." The Abbey Dean said, "Just for such a boring reason?" He was crippled by Ning Ke in Chang'an. Logically speaking, he should hate Ning Quebec. However, when he heard what Long Qing said, he was indifferent and even thought it was boring. Long Qing could not understand what the Abbey Dean was thinking. After thinking for a while, he said, "This is what I want to do the most. Maybe it is a little sad, but I seem to be living because of that person." "It is indeed sad," the Abbey Dean said. Long Qing said, "Life always needs a reason." The Abbey Dean said, "When human beings try their best to find reasons for their actions, Haotian will laugh. Since she thinks I am disrespectful, why would she let you learn from me?" After a moment of silence, Long Qing said, "She knows my loyalty and cowardice. And maybe, she needs this reason from me. So even if she laughs, she will not stop me." The Abbey Dean said, "If she no longer needs a reason to kill Ning Ke, what will you do?" Long Qing's face turned paler and he did not know how to answer. The Abbey Dean looked at him quietly and suddenly said, "Let me tell you what to do. The reason you find for your actions can only be your own reason. You have already betrayed Haotian once, why not do it again? You can only be loyal to yourself, and the source of your cowardice can only be your own selfishness. As the saying goes, treason and heresy, if you dare not even go against heaven, how can you be called treason? If you can't even let go of Taoism, how can you not be called Taoism?" Long Qing's eyes were filled with fear. He subconsciously looked out of the window, as if he felt someone was eavesdropping. After being shot into a wasteland by Ning Ke, he had bitterly decided to give up his faith. When he swallowed the half-man Taoist with his grey eyes and jumped off the cliff, he had also decided to stand on the side of darkness and no longer follow the footsteps of light. However, in the end, he found that the darkness he chose was still the darkness of Haotian. At that moment, he felt unprecedentedly relaxed, and his respect for Haotian became even more unshakable. Don't worry that she can hear us. The Abbey Dean said, Haotian is omniscient and omnipotent. That is because she stands high enough above the human world. After coming to the human world, she is just a little higher than us. Long Qing seemed to understand, but he still could not hide his fear. The Abbey Dean slowly reached out his left hand in front of Long Qing and said, Go back to your room. Hearing this, Long Qing was sure that the Abbey Dean was willing to let him cultivate in the Jishou Abbey. He was overjoyed and quickly took out the Xia hand scroll of the tomes of arcane that he had stolen. The Abbey Dean did not take the tomes of arcane and said, The 7 tomes of arcane are the weapons that Haotian gave to Taoism. The so-called weapons are knowledge and wisdom. Since you want to learn my wisdom, this tomes of arcane is in your hands. You can also read the other 5 tomes of arcane. I want something else. Long Qing vaguely understood what the Abbey Dean wanted, but he did not understand why. He took out the black peach blossom and respectfully placed it in the Abbey Dean's hand. The Abbey Dean gently turned the stem of the black peach blossom and asked, What is this? Long Qing did not understand, but he honestly answered, This is the peach blossom of your disciple. The Abbey Dean said, If you die, what will happen to this peach blossom of life? Any cultivator would definitely understand the meaning of a natal item. This was the knowledge that must be mastered at the beginning of cultivation. So Long Qing still did not understand why the Abbey Dean would ask such a simple question. He said, After I die, this peach blossom of life will wither and never come back to life again. The Abbey Dean looked at the black peach blossom between his fingers and asked, What if it is another natal item? Long Qing said, If it is a natal sword, it can be refined again. But that is equivalent to dying once. The Abbey Dean signaled him to leave the quiet room. Then, the room became quiet again. Wind came in from the window, but it could not blow away the stench from the bed. He struggled to get up and inserted Long Qing's peach blossom of life into the sand table in front of the window. He looked at the black peach blossom trembling in the wind and thought of the peach blossoms all over the peach mountain. He smiled. Haotian came to the human world, the Jishou Abbey became an abandoned prison, and the most powerful cultivator in the human world became a useless man. But the real story had just begun. It's Monday. I need to write a special chapter to solicit votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 867. There is still one day to go before the character contest. Sang is ranked first for the heroine and Shanshan is ranked first for the supporting actress. The voting is based on fan value and does not affect the fan value. Therefore, the fluctuation is very big. Since I am already in first place, I still want to fight for it. Please vote on the page of Yi Jianye's book or the main page of Chidian. This is the first chapter. I know it is easy to feel sleepy when writing dialogues without any big contradictions, but it is really hard to write. I will try to finish the next chapter before 2:00. The middle-aged Taoist walked into the quiet room and saw the Abbey Dean standing by the window smiling at the black peach blossoms. He was very surprised and hurried to help him back to the couch. He looked at the Abbey Dean seriously and said, "Senior brother, are you really going to give up your faith?" The Abbey Dean smiled and said, "I grew up in a Taoist temple and the first book I read was Taoist scripture. My faith in Haotian has long been integrated into my blood and become my breath. The meaning of my life is to carry out Haotian's will. Giving it up is equivalent to betraying myself. Naturally, I will not. The middle-aged Taoist asked confusedly, if so, why did you let Longqing stay in the Jishou Abbey? Why did you send the letter to the South Sea? Why did you treat the one in the Divine Hall of Light? Before he finished, the Abbey Dean said, I believe in Haotian, not the one in the Divine Hall of Light. The middle-aged Taoist was even more confused. He thought that the one in the Divine Hall of Light was definitely Haotian. The Abbey Dean looked at him and said, if she is Haotian, then who is fighting against the headmaster in the Divine Kingdom? Even if she used to be Haotian, is the Haotian that came to the human world still the Haotian that we believe in? Is the Haotian that has been desecrated by mortals still the Haotian that we believe in? The middle-aged Taoist said in a trembling voice, faith does not allow any doubt. The Abbey Dean said, what is piety? Piety is loyalty to faith. What is loyalty to faith? It is not only loyalty to the object that we believe in. Faith comes from you and me and falls on the other side. There is Haotian, you and me. No one can be missing. Then only the Haotian that we believe in is the real Haotian. The words were very mysterious. The middle-aged Taoist seemed to understand and his clothes were soaked with cold sweat. He said, but Haotian will not think so. I told Longqing before that since she has come to the human world, she is no longer omniscient and omnipotent. Now that I think about it, the headmaster of the academy is indeed a great person. The Abbey Dean looked at the sky outside the window and said with emotion. The middle-aged Taoist said, however, no matter how great a person is, he cannot defeat Haotian. Is death really that scary? Is the goal of human cultivation to have self-awareness and eternity? The drunkard and the butcher think that they are immortal because they have their own divine kingdom. In my opinion, it is not true. The Abbey Dean said, Haotian is not a life, so it has the property of eternity. Every beginning should have an end, and every life should return to the non-life eternity. If life wants to be eternal, then it can only become a completely different form of existence, and how is that different from death? The middle-aged Taoist asked, then why do we cultivate Tao? The Abbey Dean thought of the thousands of knives in Chang'an and the things that were filled with the taste of the human world. He thought of himself landing by the lake in the south of the city and the fish struggling in the puddle beside his face. He said, cultivation is for enlightenment and liberation. Only in this way can one obtain peace and joy at the end of life. The middle-aged Taoist frowned slightly and asked confusedly, should all the cultivation sects in the world take this path? The Abbey Dean said, people in the academy live recklessly and casually, and they will eventually go against heaven's will. They can face death calmly because they believe that they did not let down their lives. But only the truly powerful can live like them. The ordinary people in the world are like pigs and dogs. How can they face the end as narcissistically as they do? Neither the headmaster of the academy nor Kuharan have ever considered these problems. However, Haotian Taoism has always been considering these problems because we know that we are all pigs and dogs under Haotian. Therefore, we must find a way for ordinary people to face the end peacefully. The middle-aged Taoist understood and said, that is the belief in Haotian and the hope for the divine kingdom. That's right. It is never Haotian who wants us to believe in her, but we need to believe in her. I also need to believe in her. But I only believe in her in the divine kingdom, not the one over there. The Abbey Dean looked at the direction of the divine halls of West Hill in silence. The middle-aged Taoist asked after a moment of silence, what should we do with Longqing? The Abbey Dean withdrew his gaze and looked at the black peach blossom on the sand table in front of the window. He said, I am really disappointed in him. He has experienced so many setbacks and tragedies, but he still could not have the courage or desire to challenge the rules. Even if he reads all 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane, no matter how diligent he is and how blessed he is, he will at most become the second drunkard or the butcher after hundreds of years. What is the point of that? The drunkard and the butcher are the only grand cultivators in the world who had experienced the everlasting night. They were the most senior in the cultivation world and had the most unfathomable states. They only showed up in Chang'an and forced the Academy and the Tang Empire to sign a humiliating peace treaty with the divine halls of West Hill. But according to the Abbey Dean's words, even if Long Qing had become such two people, he still would not be satisfied. That was really unexpected. The middle-aged Taoist was silent. He knew very well that the drunkard and the butcher were not in his senior brother's eyes. Before the Abbey Dean came to Chang'an, he already had the peerless states of Taoism, Buddhism and the Devil's Doctrine. After understanding the state of pureness, he even felt that the drunkard and the butcher's states of mind were so rotten that they could not even be mentioned. He only had eyes for the headmaster. His life's pursuit or goal was to touch the headmaster's state of no rules. It was not the limitless state, but the limitless state. Because of his faith, the Abbey Dean could never understand the word limitless state. That was why he took Long Qing as his disciple, because Long Qing had the hope of breaking through and building up again. Because Long Qing had once betrayed his faith, he hoped that Long Qing could have the chance to walk on that path. Unfortunately, he did not succeed. This is a very cliché story. But it is the same for any story. The Abbey Dean said, Haotian had foreseen the stories that are happening in the human world many years ago. That is why she gave the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane to the human world. I am not talking about the prophecy on the Ming hand scroll, but the names of the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane. The middle-aged Taoist had been in charge of the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane in the Jishou Abbey. Naturally, he knew the names of the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane. He said in a trembling voice, "The sun sets and the sand shines, and the sky opens up." The Abbey Dean looked at the sky outside the window and said expressionlessly, "Yes, she wants to open up the sky again." The middle-aged Taoist looked as if he had suffered a heavy blow. He said with a pale face, "Then what should the human world do?" The Abbey Dean ignored his shock and uneasiness. He slowly closed his eyes and continued, "She wants to return to the kingdom of Haotian, so the divine hall holds the right to light. She wants to use the pure blood of the Chen family for tens of thousands of years as a sacrifice to open up the path to heaven. However, she will definitely fail, because the Academy will go to the Peach Mountain. Even if the people of the Academy have already reached the Peach Mountain, the Academy will also fail, because she knows everything. She has been waiting for the people of the Academy on the Peach Mountain. But she will also fail, because she thinks she can do it, but in fact, she can't. So in the end, everyone will fail, and no one will win." This passage seemed to be telling a story that had already happened, but in fact, the story had not happened yet. Therefore, it was filled with an indescribable feeling of prophecy. The middle-aged Taoist said in shock, "There is something that Haotian can't do?" The Abbey Dean opened his eyes and looked at his younger brother beside the bed. He said, "Even if the sun sets and the sand opens up tomorrow, she still needs to cut off her connection with the human world in order to return to the divine kingdom. However, she doesn't understand that the aura of the human world left in her by the headmaster of the Academy and her connection with the human world are not so easy to cut off." The middle-aged Taoist was sweating profusely, thinking that what his senior brother said today was extremely disrespectful to Haotian. He said in fear, "Haotian knows everything in the world, and she naturally knows what you want to do, senior brother." The Abbey Dean said indifferently, "Now, even I don't know what I will do. Even if she knows everything, how can she know something that doesn't exist?" Ning Kai closed his eyes on the precipice, but the precipice still thought that he was looking at him, because this was the intention. Even if he used the method of the Buddhism sect, he could only calm his mind, but he could not make it disappear. In fact, No one could make his mind disappear and escape from the calculation of heaven's will. But the Abbey Dean said so, and he could really do it. Because even though he was now a useless person, he was still a useless person in the state of pureness. In the history of mankind, there had never been such a powerful useless person like him. The middle-aged Taoist asked, "Senior brother, what should we do?" The Abbey Dean said, "Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, the divine kingdom to the divine kingdom, and the human world to the human world." The middle-aged Taoist said in a trembling voice, "This is a gamble." The Abbey Dean looked at him and said, "Do you know why the Jisho Abbey requires 7 entries and 13 exits to enter?" The middle-aged Taoist shook his head. The Abbey Dean said, "That's because before the everlasting night, the first Abbey Dean of the Jisho Abbey was a gambler before he started cultivating. He was always troubled by the interest of 7 entries and 13 exits." It was the first time that the middle-aged Taoist heard about the background of the founding master of Haotian Taoism, and he was stunned and speechless. He founded Haotian Taoism after he achieved great success in cultivation. He could have been free, but he still pitied the people. So he chose Haotian on behalf of mankind and became our faith. From that moment on, the human world we live in became the world of Haotian. We were protected by Haotian and survived for tens of thousands of years. The Abbey Dean said, "This is the most impudent gamble in the human world. Haotian Taoism has gambled on behalf of mankind for countless generations. Why shouldn't I continue?" The middle-aged Taoist was silent for a long time and said, "That's why Haotian Taoism needs to be wary of her." The Abbey Dean said, "That's right. If she can't cut off her relationship with the mortal world, we have to do it for her. If even Haotian Taoism can't do it, then we have to find a way to cut her off as well." The middle-aged Taoist said, "What about Pippi?" The Abbey Dean said, "He is also a disciple of Haotian Taoism. If he can really help her return to the divine kingdom and restore Haotian, then his death will be meaningful. If the right to light turns out to be a joke, he won't die. If he doesn't die, then he will have a great lucky chance. My blood flows in him, and he is a student of the headmaster of the academy. Whether he lives or dies, he will not be mediocre. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 868. Because of the right to light, powerhouses like the National Master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court and Qi Nian of the Xiankong Temple had come to the divine halls of West Hill. Ning Ke would not be able to resist any one of them. That was why he had kept a low profile and spent most of his time in the Revelation Institute. He did not even go to the precipice. According to his style of doing things, he should not have put himself in such a dangerous situation. In fact, according to his original plan, he would only stay for a month at most after sneaking into the West Hill Divine Palace. He would start his attack before the right to light officially started. However, he did not expect the situation to change so suddenly. Chen Pippi was imprisoned in the U prison by the West Hill Divine Palace, so he could only wait. Before he left Qinghe Prefecture, he had told Wang Jinglu that he would be back in a month at most. Now that it was autumn, he could not leave. He had to send another message to Qinghe Prefecture to ask Wang Jinglu to wait a little longer. As for Wang Jinglu's arrangements, he had no choice but to ignore it for the time being. It was already night. He returned to the Revelation Institute and took out his arrow box and iron cutlass. He walked along the path behind the Revelation Institute to the front yard of Peach Mountain. The front yard of Peach Mountain and several divine halls on the peak formed a straight line. The front yard was extremely wide and could accommodate tens of thousands of believers at the same time. It was the place where the right to light would be held. The deacons of the divine halls were tidying up the place. Not far away, several high-level array tactical masters were reinforcing the front yard. They must have arranged some dazzling miracles for the right to light. Ning Ke was wearing the uniform of a servant of the Revelation Institute. He looked like a servant in black and did not attract any attention. Although the front yard of Peach Mountain was heavily guarded, his speed and reflexes had long surpassed that of ordinary people. He sneaked into the forest on the left and buried the arrow box and iron cutlass in the soil on the side of the yard. He brushed off the dirt on his clothes and looked at the countless torches in the night. He looked at the nervous deacons of the divine halls and imagined the grand scene of the right to light in a few days. Even he began to feel nervous. Then he looked at the 4 divine halls on the peak and frowned slightly. Tonight, he did not look at the divine hall of light. Instead, he looked at the black divine hall of judgment on the edge of the cliff. The divine hall of judgment was a little far from the other 3 divine halls. It was cold and lonely. His last resort was the seat of heavenly black jade in the divine hall of judgment. However, it was too risky for the woman on the seat of heavenly black jade. Therefore, he could not make up his mind. As time went by, Chen Pipi was about to be burned to death. He heard that Yi Hongyu had been meditating in the hall ever since she returned to Peach Mountain from Chang'an. He had not seen her since he came to the West Hill Divine Palace. Since he could not meet her by chance, he had to go and have a look. It was already autumn in Qinghe Prefecture. Wang Jinglu received the secret letter from Chang'an and was silent for a long time. Then, he put on the bamboo hat again and left his residence in the carriage. He came to an ordinary house in Yangzhou City. Wang Jinglu Academy kept coughing. He stood outside the door for a while to make sure there was no ambush. Then he walked into the house and put the medicine on the table. He asked, "What do you think?" A young man was lying on the bed. His thin cheeks were very pale and he looked very haggard. The smell of medicine in the house could not completely cover the smell of blood behind the bed. There was a pile of gauze stained with blood behind the bed. The man was Cui Huasheng. He was a member of the Cui family. His wife, Qiu Fangwu, was the youngest daughter of the former Ruyang Zhizhou of the Tang Empire. On the day of the rebellion, the Qiu family was destroyed by the rebel army and his wife died on the spot. Cui Huasheng was so angry that he made a speech in Yangzhou City. Finally, he was punished by the Cui family. He was beaten in the family temple and hung on a pillar for 3 days before he was released. The family rules of the Qinghe clans had always been strict. If Cui Huasheng was not the nephew of the clan leader, Cui Shi, he would have been beaten to death. Even so, he was severely injured. Even though he survived, the wounds on his body never healed. He could only lie on the sickbed and suffer like this. Cui Huasheng looked at the man in the bamboo hat and said in a hoarse voice, "If I want to go to Fuchen River and enter the Cui Garden, it is not difficult, but I need time." Wang Jinglu took off his bamboo hat and said, "Why do you need time?" Seeing him take off his bamboo hat and reveal his true face, Cui Huasheng trusted him more. He said, "It takes some time to pretend to be remorseful and admit your mistakes. Otherwise, no one will believe you." Wang Jinglu nodded and said, "That makes sense. I was worried that I would appear too stiff. Fortunately, we have more time now." Cui Huasheng said, "Cui Shi's birthday banquet is over. There are still some days before the next Cui Garden banquet." Wang Jinglu calculated the time and found that it coincided with the right to light. He said, "That's just right." Cui Huasheng seemed to have thought of something and coughed again. After a while, he calmed down and looked at Wang Jinglu and asked seriously, "Aren't you worried that killing too many people will force the Divine Hall to fight?" Wang Jinglu thought that as long as Ning Ke fought at the right to light, the war that had stopped for more than half a year would definitely start again. What was there to worry about? The Tang Empire had just recovered from the war and was not ready to fight against the whole world again. It still needed some time to prepare psychologically and in terms of resources. But the academy was ready for it. They believed that as long as Ning Ke could carry out the plan perfectly, the West Hill Divine Palace would not dare to start a war. What really worried the academy was the drunkard and the butcher, the two swords that had been hanging outside Chang'an. But it was also because of this that the academy was determined to carry out the plan. Only by doing so could they stop the two from fighting, even if it was only for a while. Eldest brother was not at the back of the mountain of the academy. He should still be in the palace, presiding over the restoration of the god-stunning array. Fourth brother and sixth brother were also there as assistants. Third sister Yu Lian had gone far away after the battle. The rest were still in the long process of healing. Now the back of the mountain of the academy was under the command of second brother. Jun Mo was a swordsman. If he wanted to protect the back of the mountain of the academy, he had to sharpen his sword. That was why he had been sitting under the waterfall behind the courtyard to sharpen his sword these days. He had been sharpening his sword day and night. Now he had worn through more than 10 hard stones, but he still could not calm down. It was like the sleeve on his arm swaying in the wind. Mu Yu walked to the lakeside with the food box in her hand. She looked at his empty sleeve and his neatly combed gray hair. She felt a little gloomy. Then she said gently, "The headmaster once said that Pippi was happy and knew his destiny. He must be blessed in this life. Youngest brother is in the Peach Mountain. You must save him." Jun Mo could not calm down. It was not because of his gray hair and broken arm. It was not because he had no hope of reaching the state of the headmaster or the youngest uncle. It was because Chen Pippi was going to die. In the back of the mountain of the academy, he had taught Chen Pippi a lesson the most. He had hit him with the academy rules the most and talked to him the most. He had a close relationship with Chen Pippi. The right to light was about to begin. Chen Pippi was going to die. But he could only sit by the lakeside and sharpen this seemingly unbreakable iron sword. How could he be calm? There are many powerhouses in the divine halls of West Hill. I heard that the hierarch has recovered his state. There are also the swindlers from the Golden Tribe and the bald ass from the Xiankong Temple. Even though senior brother's plan seems to be flawless and youngest brother's execution is top-notch, we did not know that Pippi was in the Peach Mountain. That's why I am worried. Mu Yu knew that no matter what she said, she could not cheer him up. She put the food box on the rocks by the lakeside and said, "Eat first. Remember to go home tonight. It's cold outside." Jun Mo was not used to the word "go home." But he knew what he had to do. He stood up and said, "Thank you for your hard work these days. I will go home tonight." After eating, Jun Mo continued sharpening his sword. The hard bluestone surface was ground into fine powder by the iron sword. The powder floated on the surface of the water. That was probably the strong foam. 2 young men came to the lakeside and brought him water. At the same time, they carried the food box back to the small courtyard. Looking at Jun Mo's lonely back, they hesitated. Finally, Li Guangdi mustered up his courage and said, "Teacher, I heard from eldest uncle that if you read more Buddhist scriptures." Li Guangdi and Zhang Nianzu had not officially started cultivating since they were sent to the academy. They had not reached the initial awareness state and were just ordinary people. But after spending a lot of time with the uncle masters in the back of the mountain, they vaguely understood some principles of cultivation. Or rather, they only vaguely understood some words. Seeing their teacher being distressed by sharpening his sword by the lakeside, they were very anxious. They even tried to give Jun Mo some ideas. Li Guangdi's voice became smaller and smaller because he himself felt that he was talking nonsense. Moreover, they knew from the 5th uncle that their teacher hated Buddhism and monks. It was said that the stone statue of Buddha on the Hua mountain that crushed the Lank temple was cut down by his teacher with his sword. How could he ask his teacher to cultivate in Buddhism? Jun Mo did not look back or get angry. He said, when we get to the small town, listen to Chao Xiaoshu. Even though you haven't started cultivating, you are disciples of the academy. You can't bring shame to the academy. Many years ago, when Ning Ke took the students of the academy to the wilderness for practice, he said the same thing. The request was simple, but it was also very stressful. The two young men thought about the upcoming journey and the things they had to do. They were a little afraid and looked at their teacher's back reluctantly. Zhang Nianzu hesitated and said, "Teacher, this time we may not come back alive." "Don't worry, we are not afraid, and we won't bring shame to the academy." It's just that, Jun Mo did not let his disciple finish his words. He turned around and looked at them and said, "As long as you want to live, you will. Even if Haotian asks me, this is the only answer I can give." That night, Jun Mo stopped sharpening his sword and returned to the small courtyard. Mu Yu made supper for him and brought breakfast the next morning. She sent Zhang Nianzu and Li Guangdi out of the cloud gate array and to the front of the academy. She kept reminding them. The two young men knelt down and kowtowed to her. Li Guangdi said, "Masteress, you'd better go back early. I am still worried about the teacher." Mu Yu smiled and touched his head. She did not leave until the horse carriage left the meadow. Since she was the masteress, she had to act like one. When she returned to the small courtyard at the back of the mountain, she realized that she should have come back earlier, just as Li Guangdi had said. She looked at the gray hair on the ground and was extremely shocked. When Jun Mo raised his head from the well, her body swayed and she almost fainted. Jun Mo was very particular about his appearance. His hair was always neatly combed, no matter if it was black or gray. The ancient crown was always straight. Now his hair could no longer be combed as meticulously as before. He could no longer wear the iconic ancient crown, because he had cut off his hair. Try to finish the next chapter before 4:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 869. Mu Yu looked at Jun Mo's head and clenched her clothes tightly with her right hand. She bit her lips hard and said in a trembling voice, "What are you doing? Do you really want to practice Buddhism?" Jun Mo had just washed his hair by the well. The clear water dripped down from the top of his head and wet his clothes. Hearing the voice behind him, he didn't turn around and said, "It's okay to read some Buddhist scriptures." Mu Yu said in a trembling voice, "You respect your senior brother so much, but you don't listen to him when he asks you to read more Buddhist scriptures. They are just two kids who don't know how to practice. Why do you listen to them?" Jun Mo looked at the hair dregs on the ground beside the well. After a moment of silence, he said, "I hate the Buddhism sect the most in my life. But now that I think about it, I might have missed something." Mu Yu said sadly, "Just because you want to find a way to recover from the Buddhism sect, you want to become a monk?" Jun Mo turned around and looked at her. Seeing the tears on her face, he said, "When did I say I want to become a monk? I hate the Buddhism sect because those bald donkeys don't produce or serve their parents. How could I become a monk? I just want to read some Buddhist scriptures to see if it can help me calm down." Mu Yu felt even more sad after hearing his explanation. She said in tears, "You shaved your hair and lied to me." Jun Mo explained awkwardly, "I just think it's ugly to have gray hair. Besides, it's troublesome for you to take care of it every morning, so I shaved it." Mu Yu was stunned and asked incredulously, "Just because of that?" Jun Mo nodded and walked to her. He said, "You'll get used to it after a few days. Don't be sad. It's good to shave it. Maybe the new hair will grow back to black." Muyu smiled through her tears and subconsciously reached out to touch Jun Mo's head. Jun Mo was very polite. Usually, he wouldn't let his junior brothers and sisters touch his body, let alone touch his head. But he didn't avoid them this time. Obviously, it was hard for him to bear it. His expression was stiff. Muyu gently touched his smooth head and suddenly thought of something. She looked at him and said seriously, "I know you hate the Buddhism sect. But you can't call the monks bald donkeys." Jun Mo frowned and said, "Practicing Buddhism doesn't mean I have to respect the Buddha. Even if the Buddha comes back to life, I will still scold him." Muyu smiled and said, "Even if you want to, you can't say those two words now." The sword pavilion welcomed a guest. That guest was dressed in a green robe and had a long sword at his waist. Judging from the vicissitudes of life in his eyes, he was already middle-aged, but he had an extraordinary bearing and had a sense of elegance. He was a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state, so he should be treated with respect. However, the disciples of the Sword Garret had seen many people in the knowing destiny state. The reason why they treated him so politely was not because they admired him, but because of the Sword Sage's order and his background. The most important thing was that he easily made people admire him. The disciples of the Sword Pavilion admired him for his courage and courage. His eyes were obviously seriously injured by the Sword Saint a few years ago, and the Tang Empire has become the enemy of the world, yet he still dared to come here. Cheng Zicheng looked at the blue-robed man and slowly said, "Mr. Chao, please come in." The green-robed man was old Chao of the Spring Breeze Pavilion, Chao Xiaoshu. The sword pavilion was built between the sword-like cliffs. The mountain behind the cliff was hollow, and there was a hidden pool. Only the cave at the top could let in the sunlight. A thatched hut was built beside the pool, and the sword sage, Lu Bai, lived in it. When Chao Xiaoshu walked into the cave, Lu Bai was not in the hut, but fishing by the pool. The figures of the fish could be vaguely seen in the cold water, but there was no hook under the fishing line. Chao Xiaoshu walked behind Lu Bai and bowed to him. Lu Bai did not turn around and said, "I heard that Mr. First never used a hook when fishing, so I wanted to learn from him. However, after so many days, no fish came up, but you came." Chao Xiaoshu said, "Why does the sword sage need to learn from others?" Lu Bai put the bamboo pole aside, shook his head and said, "Everyone should learn from others. Even the headmaster of the academy once learned from an old farmer, let alone people like us." Chao Xiaoshu said, "That makes sense, so I came here today to learn from the sword sage." Lu Bai said coldly, "A few years ago, you were in the imperial palace of Chang and watching the lake of knowing destiny. After that, you passed by the South Jin kingdom and invited me to fight with my sword. For the sake of the Tang Emperor, I gave you a sword, and you were blind for several months. Even if you have made progress now, how can you be my opponent? If you had directly entered the second floor of the academy, there might have been hope. Now that you say, 'Learn from me,' it is so arrogant and stupid. It does not sound like something you would say. You are like a great river in sword Taoism, and I am just a stream in the mountains. How can I compare to you? But water will always flow to the bottom, and the principle is the same." Chao Xiaoshu smiled and said, "I know very well that I am not qualified to challenge you, but I am going to do something, and I may lose something very important. I want to make up for the regret in my life before that. However, looking back, I have friends, brothers, a wife, a son, and a daughter. Although my father is old, he can still eat 2 bowls of rice, and I still have the strength to scold the Abbey Dean on the streets of Chang'an. I have not been a mediocre person, but I have made some achievements. Although they are not great, I am willing to do them. I have missed some opportunities, but I do not feel regret. I have never lacked courage, and even dared to draw my sword in the face of a powerful enemy. I have never lost my calmness, and I am sure that my life over the past few decades has been very valuable, and I have not wasted it." His calm and gentle voice echoed in the quiet cliff cave, and when it collided with the stone walls that were as hard as swords, it became unusually sure, like metal colliding. Lu Bai's eyes became brighter and brighter, and he felt that this person was really interesting. He asked, "I think I know what you want to do." Chao Xiaoshu smiled a little shamefully and said, "The biggest regret in my life is that I could not even take one sword from you, so I want to ask you to grant me another sword. But because there are things more important than my life to do, I ask you to spare my life. I know this request is indeed a little ridiculous, but please fulfill it." Lu Bai slapped his thigh and laughed, saying, "How can I not fulfill such a ridiculous request?" It was almost noon, and the sunlight finally shone from the top of the cliff cave of the sword hut, falling on the cold pond. The fish hidden in the water plants swam out happily, coveting the warmth that had not been there for a long time. After a while, these fish hid in the depths of the water plants in fear, because the sunlight in the cliff cave was suppressed by several stunning sword lights, and the sharp sword intent seemed to cut the pond water into countless pieces. For extremely clear sounds rang out, and then everything became quiet. Lu Bai sat by the pond, as if he had not moved. The ancient sword beside him had already returned to its sheath, as if it had not moved. There was only half of the broken sword left in Chao Xiaoshu's hand, and 4 sword pieces scattered in front of him. Previously, he had divided one sword into 5, and 4 of them had blocked 4 of Lu Bai's swords, but he had still lost. Chao Xiaoshu's face was slightly pale, and his chest was stained with blood, but his eyes were very bright, and his expression was very satisfied, because he had taken 4 swords. Most importantly, he had no more regrets in his life. Lu Bai looked at him, and suddenly narrowed his eyes and asked, "Are the Tangs so cruel to themselves?" Lu Bai was the most powerful man in the world. In the past few years, he had even had countless opportunities to cross the threshold and enter above the 5 states, but he had been suppressing his state of mind and momentum in this cliff cave, until the Battle of Verdant Canyon, when he was stimulated by Jun Mo to use the strongest sword intent. Even if he did not want to cross the threshold, he still did. When one reached this state, he had an indescribable sense of everything in the world. At the moment when his sword intent invaded Chao Xiaoshu's body, he knew what the Tangs were thinking. Chao Xiaoshu looked at him and said with a smile, "There are many Tangs who are as cruel as me. If the South Jin Kingdom and the Tang Empire join hands, and the Sword Garret and the Academy side by side, maybe even the heavens will be afraid of us." Lu Bai did not speak. Chao Xiaoshu stood up, bowed, and then walked out of the Sword Garret. The autumn wind blew up his green robe that was cut by the sword wind, revealing the long sword wound on his chest and abdomen. The bloody stroke seemed to pierce through heaven and earth. His snow mountain and ocean of qi were all destroyed by Lu Bai's powerful sword intent. From then on, he could no longer cultivate, and could only be an ordinary person. However, the autumn wind blew gently, and he felt refreshed. Chao Xiaoshu left the South Jin Kingdom and came to a small town on the border between the Song Kingdom and the Yan Kingdom. He bought a yard in the town, rented a house on the street, and started a painting and calligraphy business. Later, 2 teenagers from far away also came to the town and were hired by him to help him. The business of the painting and calligraphy shop quickly went on the right track. It didn't take long for even the nobles and celebrities in the county to know that an elegant merchant had appeared in the town. People only knew that the businessman came from Chang'an. He was elegant and unrestrained, and had an ancient style without arrogance. He was good at doing business, but did not use money. He welcomed customers, but did not bully the poor. He was like a refreshing breeze that made people feel relaxed and happy. Although he did not bully the poor, and even if beggars came to him, Chao Xiaoshu would still give them money, and even personally pour tea for them. However, such an elegant business had to choose its customers. Even the most unreasonable beggars would be touched by his kindness, and would not dare to hold a porcelain bowl and drink tea every day. The butcher in the only butcher shop in the town, covered in oil, was not interested in appreciating the paintings and calligraphy. The butcher preferred to eat meat. The elegant business of painting and calligraphy were always related to tea and wine. The butcher was not happy to stay there, but the drinker was different. When the drinker found out that Cao Xiaoshu was really good at appreciating these things, he refused to leave the painting and calligraphy shop. Every day, he discussed painting and calligraphy with tea and wine, and only returned to the butcher shop when it was time to eat. When Cao Xiaoshu walked into the small town, Lu Bai also left the sword garret and walked into the city of Linkang. Lu Bai's sword was the greatest pride and glory of the South Jin kingdom for many years. In the city of Linkang, he was like a god. However, when he walked into the city of Linkang, no one noticed him. Because no one believed that such an ordinary person could be the Sage of Sword, and no one would believe that the Sage of Sword would walk in the dirty streets of the eastern city. Lu Bai walked to the shabby house and looked at Yi Su, who was teaching the children. Yi Su looked up and saw him. He shook his head helplessly and said to the children, "That's all for today." "Yes, that's all for today. 3 chapters are over. See you tomorrow." In the 33rd chapter, one word needs to be changed. The Abbey Dean is sitting in front of the window, not standing in front of the window, unless he uses a prosthesis. His fingers, even if Sang Sang helped him grow them, would be too miserable. As for the second brother, I wanted to write that his hair turned white overnight, but I thought it was too old-fashioned. So I made his hair gray. I wanted him to take this opportunity to shave his hair, so that a brand new second brother would appear. Please vote for me at the end. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 870. You should thank Jun Mo. Yi Su said this to Lu Bai for the first time in the dilapidated house. Then he said with emotion, "Even though I can no longer practice swordsmanship, I am satisfied to see your sword in the human world." Lu Bai was standing by the window, looking at the lunch box on the windowsill. Hearing Yi Su's words, he turned to him and said with a smile, "I am satisfied too." He was wearing a comfortable silk shirt, which was not embroidered with money on purpose. He was wearing a pair of comfortable cloth shoes, which did not make him look refined. He didn't carry a sword, nor did he emit any fierce sword intent. With his hands behind his back, he looked like an ordinary person in Linkang City, giving people a comfortable feeling from inside to outside. Yi Su's ocean of qi and mountain of snow had been destroyed, but his eyes were still there. One look at Lu Bai and he knew that the most powerful man in the world had improved again. But he couldn't tell which level he had reached. It was difficult for the highest peak in the world to grow even an inch higher. But Lu Bai did it. Yi Su knew that it must have something to do with the Battle of Verdant Canyon. That was why he said that Lu Bai should thank Jun Mo. The Battle of Verdant Canyon was the peak of swordsmanship in the human world. Lu Bai, the Sage of Sword, Jun Mo of the Academy, and Yi Su of Haotian Taoism were the protagonists of this battle. They were the 3 most powerful swordsmen in the human world. In this pinnacle battle, Yi Su had become a cripple, Jun Mo had lost his arm, and his cultivation path had been severed. Lu Bai had also suffered serious injuries, but he was indeed the strongest cultivator in the world. He was the first to recover his cultivation level, and he even had a breakthrough. Lu Bai said, "Cao Xiaoshu went to the sword garret to see me. He never entered the academy in his life. His Taoism fate was broken and he could only live in the wild. He was not on the right path and could never reach the peak of swordsmanship. He was not as good as you 10 years ago. But he was free and easy. He was fearless in the face of death and had no regrets in the face of loss. He lived his life according to his heart. I learned something from his words and deeds, so I left the sword garret. Only then did Yi Su realize that there was another reason besides Jun Mo. Lu Bai continued, a few years ago, I left Chao Xiaoshu's sword in the sword garret. After that, the former judge lent it to Yiqing. Yiqing was injured by Ning Ke, so I lent the sword to Yi Hongyu and asked her to kill the judge. That was the happiest time I've ever borrowed a sword. Last year, the headmaster of the academy borrowed my sword in the wilderness to slay dragons and gods. That was the most glorious time for me to borrow a sword. This time, when the academy asked Chao Xiaoshu to borrow a sword from me, I did not refuse because I like this person, and also because the headmaster of the academy once gave me glory. This is the most willing time for me to borrow a sword. Yi Su walked to the window and poured him a bowl of water. The first sword I borrowed killed the judgment, the second sword cut the heavens, and the third sword cut the heavens. If I can kill with a borrowed sword, then who should I kill with my own sword? Lu Bai smiled and said, if I can kill people with a borrowed sword, then who should I kill with my own sword? When I came out of seclusion and looked around, I did not see Ku Haoran or Lian Sheng. The headmaster of the academy has already ascended to heaven, the abbey dean has become a useless person, and Jun Mo is not free yet. You are preaching in a shabby alley. Who else is worth killing? Yi Su guessed what he was going to say and said, you will die. Lu Bai said, a sword is lonely and straight. It would rather be broken than rust in the grave. Yi Su held the bowl of water and said after a moment of silence, why are you telling me this? Lu Bai said, Chang'an is too far away. Except for Jun Mo, I am only willing to tell you this. Only Jun Mo and Yi Su were qualified to hear these words. That was why he came to Lingang after leaving the sword garret. Besides, there was another thing he wanted to tell them. What you have done and what you have preached to the people will not be tolerated by Haotian or Taoism. Even the abbey dean will not tolerate you. I will probably never come back again. Without my protection, you will become a rotten corpse in the filthy streets. That is why I am here to persuade you to go to the academy. Yi Su said, someone once said the same thing. Lu Bai said, it seems that Ning Ke has really left Chang'an. I think the Peach Mountain will be very lively in a few days. How can I not go and have a look? Yi Su said after a moment of silence, maybe it will be really lively. Lu Bai said, your younger brother is going to die. Yi Su said, if it is convenient, please deliver a letter for me. Lu Bai said, yes. Yi Su said, I hope it will not affect your Taoism. Lu Bai said, it won't. Yi Su handed over a piece of paper and said sincerely, I wish you can see the Tao. Lu Bai said, I want to see the Tao, and the Tao must see me. After saying this, he took the bowl of water from Yi Su. He did not drink it but poured it on the ground. Then he laughed and walked out of the iron house with his hands behind his back. No one knew where he was going. Yi Su looked at the water stains on the ground and knew that this was an early morning. There was no one in the world who was worth killing for Lu Bai. So when he decided to do something, no one could change his mind. Yi Su did not spend too much energy on this matter. He just wanted Pippi to be alive. However, he could not do anything now except write a letter. A letter was sent to the Divine Hall of Judgment through a secret channel. It was said to be a secret channel because even the people in the Divine Hall of Judgment did not know who this channel belonged to and where it led to. When the deacons in black of the judicial department reacted as quickly as possible and began to investigate the clues, 3 people died on the cliff plateau of the Divine Halls of West Hill. No matter how horrible the punishment of the judicial department was, they could not make the dead talk. There was a sword drawn on the cover of the letter, and it was written that the great divine priest of judgment would read it in person. The deacons of the judicial department had long been in awe of the woman on the seat of heavenly black jade. They did not dare to act on their own, nor did they dare to let other divine halls know. They quietly sent the letter to the divine hall. Yi Hongyu looked at the cover of the letter and knew where it came from. Several years ago, a letter had been sent to her through this secret channel. However, at that time, she lived in a remote stone house on the cliff plateau and was in the most difficult period of her life. That letter was very important to her at that time. She did not know why Lu Bai wrote to her at this time. When she opened the cover and saw the familiar but strange handwriting, her fingers could not help but stiffen. After reading the letter, she was silent for a long time. In front of the verdant canyon, she had arranged more than 10 deacons in black and several West Hill divine guards to protect Yisu. In less than a few months, these people died one after another. She was very clear that some people in Haotian Taoism wanted to kill Yisu to gain some kind of spiritual recognition. What really worried her was that she did not know where Yisu had gone and whether he was safe and sound. It was not until she received this letter that she knew that her brother had been in Linkong City in the South Jin Kingdom. With the secret protection from the sword Garrett, he should be safe. She felt a little relieved. However, thinking of what her brother had written in the letter, she frowned again. A faint Haotian's divine flame overflowed from her palm. The letter and the cover of the small sword were burned into ashes. She slowly let go of her hand and looked in the direction of the divine hall of light. Yi Hongyu could guess who the person in the divine hall of light was and why he did not want to see her. She felt it was ridiculous and even a little contemptuous of that person. This contempt and ridicule was only based on their relationship in the human world. After all, that person was a superior being. What could she do? Years ago by the North Yen Lake, Yisu was ordered by Haotian to stop her from killing Long Qing. From that moment on, she began to doubt Haotian and felt disappointed in her brother. However, what happened by the Sisui River made all her doubts disappear. Yisu had reminded her in front of the verdant canyon. He had also doubted it, but then he suffered a painful failure. Maybe it was Haotian's punishment for him. There was no moon tonight because of the thick clouds and fog. Ning Kei slowly climbed up the dark precipice at the back of the Peach Mountain. The heavily guarded West Hill Divine Palace did not pay any attention to this precipice. Since ancient times, except for the headmaster, no one could pass through the peach blossom in the valley, and no one could ignore the tactical array on the precipice. He did not stop at the third cliff plateau, but continued to climb up the precipice. After a long time, he finally climbed to the highest cliff plateau on the top of the Peach Mountain. The route he chose was the most remote part of the cliff plateau, right behind the Divine Hall of Judgment. He gently wiped off the rock debris on his hands on his legs and looked at the dark and solemn Divine Hall in front of him in silence. There was no doubt that this was a gamble. In the original plan of the academy, this was the last resort. They could only choose it when there was no other way. However, he had been silent for many days and still could not guarantee Chen Pippi's life. Therefore, he had to take the risk here. The Divine Hall of Judgment was very quiet, especially on the side facing the precipice. There were no patrolling cavalrymen of the Divine Hall, not even black-robed deacons or red-robed priests. The space inside the Divine Hall was extremely large, extremely magnificent, and extremely monotonous. The black floor reflected the light of the crystal lamp, but it did not feel warm at all, only cold and solemn. This feeling was very in line with the word judgment and the temperament of the current master of the Divine Hall. But in Ning Kei's eyes, the Divine Hall of Judgment was like a big tomb, and the black jade throne was like a coffin. He looked at the beautiful woman sitting on the black jade throne with her eyes closed, supporting her chin, and said, "Help me." The black jade throne was very large, like a sea of blood. She wore a blood-colored divine robe of judgment and sat on the huge throne, like the thickest and coldest drop of blood in the sea of blood. The black jade throne was very cold, like a blood crystal coffin. She closed her eyes and supported her chin with her eyelashes still, as if she was the princess sleeping in the blood crystal coffin and could hardly wake up. She opened her eyes. The sea of blood began to undulate, and the blood coffin slowly opened. She did not look at Ning Ke, but at the black floor in front of the throne. She said, "Is this the promise of life and death? I can't stand it anymore. 1 chapter today, 3 chapters tomorrow. To be continued." If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 871. If the Divine Hall knew that Ning Ke was on the Peach Mountain, he would definitely die. Yi Hongyu said that it was a promise of life and death because he had come to the seat of heavenly black jade bravely, or perhaps foolishly. Then his life was in her hands. Her tone was a little sarcastic, because the words, promise of life and death, not only described the situation that Ning Ke was facing, but also the reason why he came to the Peach Mountain. What was love in the world? It made people pledge their lives to each other. It was usually because of love. Ning Ke didn't come to the Peach Mountain for her. He probably didn't come for Chen Pipi, who was imprisoned in the U prison. He must have come for the person in the Divine Hall of Light. Losing one's head for love and seeking one's own death, what a foolish choice this was. Yi Hongyu had always thought that Ning Ke was one of the few people in the world who was as calm and sensible as she was. Therefore, she could not help but feel disappointed when she saw him indulging in the childish choice of dying for love like the male protagonists in novels. Naturally, she mocked him. Ning Ke and she were indeed the same kind of people. Hearing this sentence, he understood the hidden meaning in her words. After a moment of silence, he said, "This time I ask for your help, not because of her, but because of Pippi. You and he had the same childhood memories. Can you really watch him be burned to ashes?" Yi Hongyu said expressionlessly, "My childhood memories are the same as the one in the Divine Hall of Light and you. They are the images that I want to forget and hate the most." As she spoke, she was still leaning on the seat of heavenly black jade. She looked at the black ground in front of the seat of heavenly black jade. She did not turn around or look at Ning Ke, who was below the seat of heavenly black jade. Ning Ke looked at her beautiful profile and suddenly said, "I met Yi Su in Lingkong." If Yi Hongyu had heard Ning Ke's words before she received the letter, she might have said something different. Then no one would know how this conversation would end. She just said indifferently, "Haotian knows everything in the world. You can hide your arrival from the hierarch and me, but you can't hide it from her. I don't know what Haotian is thinking, so I won't interfere. You are destined to die on this mountain, not in my hands." After saying this, she closed her eyes and said no more, as if she was going to sleep again. No sound could be heard in the empty Divine Hall of Judgment. It was so quiet that it was frightening. Ning Ke kept silent for a long time and then stepped back. When the huge and cold crystal lamp above the Divine Hall of Judgment could no longer shine on his face, he said to her, "Thank you." From the moment he entered the Divine Hall of Judgment, he had given his life to Yi Hongyu. As long as she opened her eyes and glanced at him or said a single word, countless experts of the Divine Hall would appear. However, she did nothing. He was grateful for her warning and also for not killing him. There was no more sound in the darkness, not even the sound of breathing. Ning Ke left without a sound. Yi Hongyu still did not open her eyes. She sat quietly on the black jade throne. Many years ago, she had told Ning Ke that one day, they would meet on the battlefield, and one of them would die. There had never been any good memories between them that could last longer than life and death. Killing Ning Ke could put an end to the war immediately. Logically speaking, as the great divine priest of judgment, she should not have any hesitation. However, she chose to remain silent. Because she wanted Chen Pipi to live. Since she could not do anything for her brother, she could only hope that Ning Kai could do it. The most important problem was that she did not know if the person in the Divine Hall of Light was watching here. She did not know what arrangement that person had made for Ning Quebec. The person who should have been above the vault of heaven had come to the human world. Therefore, the human world had become chaotic and complicated. Even if the great divine priest of revelation, Li Qingshan, and Master Qishan were reborn at the same time, and the Abbey Dean had returned to his peak state, they would not be able to figure out the final direction of the chess game. Because heaven was unpredictable. It was silent in the divine hall of judgment. Yi Hongyu sat quietly on the black jade throne with her hands supporting her chin. She thought of the coming right to light and gradually fell asleep. She did not want to think about it anymore. The blood-colored judgment god robe covered her perfect body. The blood-colored black jade throne nourished her mental state. She looked dignified and lonely at the same time. In the autumn of the 3450th year of Daji, the right to light was officially held on Peach Mountain. Several small towns in front of Peach Mountain had been heavily guarded. More than 2,000 papal cavalrymen wearing armor with talisman lines rode on handsome horses and patrolled around vigilantly. The front yard of Peach Mountain was even more guarded. More than 100 West Hill divine guards carrying divine knives were watching the passages around like eagles. In the early morning, envoys and believers from various countries entered the mountain one after another. However, the mountain path was silent. No one dared to make a noise. It was not because of the calming effect of the ritual music coming from the front yard, but because of the solemn and sacred atmosphere that enveloped the entire Peach Mountain. More than 10 talisman masters and array tactical masters stood in the center of the front yard of Peach Mountain and began to activate the array that had been set up beforehand. The array was activated. The autumn wind on Peach Mountain gradually became stronger. Peach blossom petals were scattered in the wind. The chi of heaven and earth in the foothills was summoned. Dozens of Hautian sect flags were fluttering in the wind. The 47 waterfalls on Peach Mountain were broken into countless tiny water droplets that were blown to the front yard of Peach Mountain and then slowly fell. The drizzle fell on the front yard of Peach Mountain. The dust was collected and the dry autumn air was gone. The flat stone ground was washed clean. The altar made of white stone was as clean as jade. The drizzle from the waterfall was turned into mist by the autumn sun. The mist rose into the air and turned into 3 big shields. When the mist dissipated, it turned into 3 halos made of clear light, covering the entire Peach Mountain. The clear light gradually disappeared, but the 3 big arrays had been set up. Tens of thousands of believers were also sprinkled by the drizzle. Their clothes were not wet. Instead, they felt refreshed. When the 3 cloud shields turned into 3 halos and finally into 3 arrays, those believers who saw such arrays for the first time were so excited that they knelt on the ground and kept praising Haotian. The new emperor of the Yan kingdom, Chongming, arrived. So did the emperors of the small kingdoms such as Song, Qi, Liang, and Zhen. The lord of the Song family, the abbot of the Lank Temple, Monk Guanhai, the world wayfarer of Buddhism, Xiankong Temple's Qi Nian, the national master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court and the #1 martial arts master of the Royal Court, General Lebu, the rogue cultivators from all over the world, the teachers and students of the Revelation Institute, the divine priests and deacons of the 4 divine halls, and even the servants were here. These people stood closer to the foot of the mountain, far away from the tens of thousands of believers. They watched the believers kneeling on the ground and praying, each with their own thoughts. The divine priests and deacons of the divine halls of West Hill were naturally proud. The Buddhist priests remained silent. The national master of the royal court smiled and said nothing. General Lebu, however, frowned. Two sacred chariots slowly descended from Peach Mountain and stopped above the front yard. The sacred chariot in the middle was extremely huge. There were thousands of rays of light shining through the layers of gauze. There was a tall figure in the light. It was the hierarch lord of the divine halls of West Hill. The sacred chariot on the side was relatively smaller, but the gauze was as red as blood. It was indescribably cold and murderous. A beautiful woman was sitting in the chariot. Her black hair flowed like a waterfall. It was the great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hongyu. It was the first time for most of the believers to see the hierarch and the great divine priest of judgment. After seeing the two sacred chariots, they were so excited that even their voices trembled. The bigwigs on the front yard felt even more complicated. The divine halls of West Hill had always ruled the world of Haotian. The hierarch lord and the three great divine priests of West Hill were the most powerful beings in the world. However, the great divine priest of revelation was dead and there was no successor. The divine hall of light had been in constant turmoil for the past 20 years. Now, even the eternal lamp in the hall had been extinguished. Today's right to light was so grand, but the two sacred chariots seemed so lonely, which made the divine halls of West Hill look even more gloomy. Compared to the divine halls of West Hill, the guests who came to watch the ceremony were more powerful. Apart from the academy and the devil's doctrine of the wilderness, almost all the powerful cultivators in the human world were present. Among them, the national master of the royal court and Qi Nian of the Xiankong temple were the most distinguished, which made the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom even more conspicuous. The representative of the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom was Lu Yiqing. This blind swordsman in the knowing destiny state was rumored to have killed the emperor of South Jin Kingdom. However, compared to the other people at the right to light, he was still lacking. This made the divine halls of West Hill very dissatisfied. The hierarch's palanquin released his power and everyone could feel his displeasure. At this moment, a white line suddenly appeared in the clear blue sky above Peach Mountain. The white line was very thin, as if someone had drawn a line on the blue sky with a needle. Then, a sword appeared in the front yard of Peach Mountain. The sword looked very ordinary. The hilt was wrapped in soft and dense Songjiang cloth. The blade was probably made of green steel. It did not look very sharp, and there were no Fu characters carved on it. But everyone's eyes were attracted by the sword. Because the sword was not in anyone's hand. It was suspended in the air above the front yard of Peach Mountain. The sword vibrated slightly, making the air vibrate and making a comfortable sound. No one knew how the sword came to the front yard. Even the hierarch lord, the national master of the royal court, and Qi Nian could only see a thin white line in the sky before the sword appeared in front of them. Moreover, the invisible array that covered the outermost layer of Peach Mountain could not stop the sword at all. It did not even react. That was the most shocking thing. The flying sword quietly hovered in the air, as if it was held by an invisible hand. If someone was behind the sword, they would see that the head of the sword was slightly raised, facing the divine hall of light on Peach Mountain. There was no sign of disrespect. It just looked at that place quietly. Try to finish the second chapter before 3:00. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 872. Perhaps it was because the sword had penetrated the invisible array, a gentle autumn wind blew in the front yard of Peach Mountain. A few yellow leaves fell on the ground. A yellow leaf fell on the sword. It did not break because there was no sword intent on the sword. It was just ordinary. The leaf bounced on the ground and fell back to the ground. It was very unusual. Because everyone on the front yard had already guessed whose sword it was. Only Lu Bai's sword could appear in front of them in an instant and fly to Peach Mountain in such an arrogant manner. The hierarch's tall figure leaned forward in the dazzling light. The hierarch was a little angry because Lu Bai's sword was facing the divine hall of light. Even though it was disrespectful, it did not show its submission. More importantly, the sword appeared after the hierarch. This meant that Lu Bai placed himself above the hierarch. He was the hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill. Being above him meant being above the human world. At the back of the mountain of the academy, the hierarch was severely injured by the 23-year cicada cultivation. He lost his sight, lost his hand, and lost his ocean of qi. He had to sacrifice his life to escape back to Peach Mountain. He thought he was useless and hid behind the dazzling light because of the fear in his heart. Who would have thought that Haotian would come to the human world? From the moment he knelt in front of Haotian, it was the first time he had real confidence and courage since his lower abdomen was injured decades ago. Haotian was angry at the Jishou Abbey and he was now the real representative of Haotian in the human world. As long as he was on Peach Mountain, he would be invincible. No matter how strong Lu Bai was, he would not be a match for him. Even the drunkard and the butcher would not dare to disrespect him. Thus, when he saw the sword that broke through the clouds from thousands of miles away, the headmaster did not hide his anger at all. However, the sword did not react at all. It maintained its calm and normal posture. There were 5 visiting professors in the divine halls of West Hill. Xia Ho was dead and the master of calligrapher was living in seclusion. However, Lu Bai was still the most respected one among all the visiting professors. If his sword came to Peach Mountain, it meant that he had come to Peach Mountain as well. He had shown enough respect for the right to light. Under such circumstances, the hierarch could not do anything rash. The chief of the Revelation Institute was standing beside the sacred sedan. He was in charge of the arrangements for the right to light today. Seeing that the hierarch did not give any orders, he signaled for the ceremony to begin. The sacred Taoist canon music resounded throughout the Peach Mountain and gradually gathered in the front yard. The music entered everyone's ears. The qi of heaven and earth danced with the music. The wind blew again, but this time it was not the chilly autumn wind. Instead, it was as warm as spring. The peach blossoms in the valley swayed gently in the wind and their petals became more tender. They began to bloom in autumn and then floated down the Peach Mountain with the wind, dancing in the air above the front yard. Tens of thousands of peach petals fluttered in the air, scattering bursts of strange fragrance onto the ground. This kind of fragrance was not the natural fragrance of peach blossoms. It was thicker than the fragrance of any flower in the world, sweeter than the frosting of hibiscus store. However, when it entered people's noses, it did not feel greasy at all. Instead, it was fresh like the wind after a rain. Tens of thousands of believers looked up at the dancing peach blossoms in the sky. Looking at such a beautiful and dazzling scene and smelling such a refreshing fragrance, they were extremely intoxicated. Those who could pass the examination of the Taoist temples and were willing to travel thousands of miles to Peach Mountain to participate in the right to light were naturally the most pious believers in the world. Based on a simple and clear logic, all piety came from suffering. Therefore, most of the tens of thousands of believers were poor. Many of them were seriously ill or even dying. They had to be carried by their families to the West Hill Divine Kingdom. When the fragrance wafted in, the sick and even disabled believers suddenly felt that the negative emotions deep in their hearts had magically disappeared. They no longer complained about their miserable lives and even felt much better. It was as if they could see the divine kingdom of Haotian in the fragrance. The crippled believer threw away his crutches and knelt on the ground, supporting his trembling body with his hands. He kept kowtowing to Peach Mountain. The seriously ill believer on the stretchers ignored his family's dissuasion. Even if he could not get up, he still had to turn over and kowtow to Peach Mountain. He supported his weak body and kept touching the ground with his forehead. In autumn, the front yard of Peach Mountain was filled with a warm spring breeze. Tens of thousands of peach blossoms danced in the wind, exuding an intoxicating fragrance. Suddenly, the wind stopped and the peach blossoms fell. The peach blossoms fell and turned into a magnificent flower rain. Tens of thousands of believers were bathed in the flower rain. All of them had knelt down. The peach petals fell on their bodies and gradually turned into soft light particles. They seeped into their clothes, their skin, and finally into their flesh and blood. Then, they gradually disappeared. Although the crippled believer did not grow a new limb, he could no longer feel the pain from his broken leg. The pus-filled wounds became very clean and healthy skin appeared on the red and tender flesh. The seriously ill believers gradually regained their vitality. Their pale faces turned red at a speed visible to the naked eye. The illness that had tortured them for countless years was washed away by the peach blossoms. The believers who did not suffer from illness, because of their piety, also received great favor from God. The white-haired old man suddenly discovered that he had grown black hair, and the young man felt his body filled with strength. He had never felt so healthy and strong in his life. The woman's face became taut and smooth. If one looked closely, one could even see a few dark-skinned female believers. Their faces seemed to have become much whiter, as if they had put on several boxes of expensive Chenjinji cosmetic stores cosmetics. The front yard of Peach Mountain was filled with cheers and cries of joy. Tens of thousands of believers kowtowed to Peach Mountain, weeping and thanking God for the blessings he had bestowed upon them. The right to light was the grandest ceremony of Haotian Taoism. It meant that Haotian had sent a miracle to the human world. The tens of thousands of believers on the front yard of Peach Mountain had never doubted it, but it did not mean that the envoys did not. After all, miracles only appeared in the scriptures and no one had ever seen it with their own eyes. However, as the scene unfolded before their eyes, no one dared to doubt it anymore. Everyone knelt down. The peach blossoms were everywhere. The sick were cured and the healthy were eliminated. If this was not a miracle, then what was? The divine priests and deacons of the divine halls of West Hill had already knelt down. The national master of the royal court and General Buell were the first cultivators to kneel. Soon, the envoys and the rogue cultivators followed suit. Qi Nian of the Xiankong Temple, Guanhai of the Lank Temple, and the monks of the White Tower Temple were still standing. They were worshipping Buddha. However, facing the miracle from Haotian, the monks looked extremely solemn. They put their palms together and bowed. Qi Nian looked at the peak and bowed deeply. He was touched by God's mercy. The sword in the air, facing the divine hall of light, also bowed slightly. The crying, thanking, and praying in the front yard of Peach Mountain gradually stopped. After a series of complicated procedures, the most important part of the right to light had finally come. The sacrifice to heaven. Countless Taoist temples in the human world offered sacrifices to heaven every day. Not to mention a place like the divine halls of West Hill. They were very familiar with the process. However, since it was the grandest right to light, it was naturally different from the ordinary ones. The white stone altar in the front yard of Peach Mountain was proof of that. More importantly, the sacrificial offerings for the right to light must be extraordinary. The altar near the white stone altar was filled with rare treasures offered by various sects and rogue cultivators. There were even 2 herbs needed to make the heavenly power pill. One could imagine how much effort the believers of Haotian had put in for this right to light. However, compared to the official offerings of the right to light, these rare treasures and the 2 herbs were too shabby, because today's offering was a person. That man was certainly not an ordinary person. He was called the peerless genius of Haotian Taoism the moment he was born. He had the purest blood of Haotian Taoism. Both his paternal and maternal lineages were the noblest inheritance of Haotian Taoism. He had studied and lived in the unknown place of Haotian Taoism since he was a child. Later, he went to the academy in Chang'an to study with the headmaster. He was the youngest knowing destiny state cultivator in the cultivation world. He had even taken the heavenly power pill. He was the only Chen Pipi in the world who belonged to the academy and Haotian Taoism. The warm autumn sun warmed the white stone altar. However, when the altar was opened, a cold aura seeped out from the ground and almost froze the entire altar. This was because the bottom of the altar led directly to the Yu prison. The white stone altar opened and closed again. 2 West Hill divine guards appeared in front of everyone with Chen Pipi in custody. Chen Pipi was still wearing the uniform of the academy. No one knew if this was the Divine Hall's arrangement or if he was too lazy to change after he was captured and brought back to Peach Mountain. He did not have any restrictive talismans on him, nor did he have the usual shackles on prisoners. Even his hands were not tied with ropes. The West Hill Divine Palace was not worried that he could escape. Although he did not have any restrictive talismans on him, the ocean of qi and mountain of snow in his body was personally set by Haotian. No one could undo it. Around the altar were envoys and cultivators from various countries. Some of them did not know Chen Pipi and only a few had seen him before. However, through the Divine Hall's deliberate propaganda, everyone knew that he was Mr. 12 of the academy and that he was his father and son with the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey. No one spoke. It was quiet. Some did not know what to say, while more did not dare to say anything. The West Hill Divine Palace had chosen Chen Pipi as the sacrifice for the right to light. This meant that after thousands of years, the internal structure of Haotian Taoism had finally changed. This meant that the heavens were dissatisfied with Haotian Taoism, especially with Jishou Abbey. On the other hand, it was a cruel punishment for the academy. It was very quiet and everyone looked very solemn. Some people did not dare to speak because they knew very well that this grand right to light was a sacrifice to Haotian, but it was also a trap that Haotian Taoism had set for the academy. The academy did not send anyone to the right to light, but they would definitely show up at Peach Mountain today. Even though they knew it was a trap, they still had to come. Otherwise, why would the academy be called the academy? The peach blossoms were everywhere and Haotian had blessed them. The atmosphere was sacred and joyous. However, everyone knew that this atmosphere could not last forever. The moment the people from the academy appeared at Peach Mountain, the right to light would become the fiercest battlefield. No one knew how many powerhouses would die. I will try to finish the next chapter before 5:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 873. The people near the white stone altar knew that the academy would come, but they did not know when. This kind of waiting was undoubtedly a kind of mental torture, so they looked solemn and silent. This kind of silence, in a sense, represented the respect and even awe of the academy. However, at this stage, no one believed that the academy could still win, even though they were in awe. Liu Bai's sword, the hierarch and the judgment, the national master of the Golden Tribe, the generals of the royal court, and Qi Nian of the Buddhism sect were all powerful cultivators. Though none of them were as powerful as the Abbey Dean, this was not the verdant canyon or Chang'an. This was the home field of the divine halls of West Hill. With the tactical array and manpower that Haotian Taoism had accumulated over the years, Mr. First, Mr. Second, and even Mr. Third, who was rumored to be the 23-year cicada cultivation, were all here. Not to mention that Qi Nian and the national master had vaguely guessed the secrets of the divine hall of light, and those in the divine hall knew about the drunkard and the butcher. This was not something that the academy could fight against. Ignorance always made sense, especially on the religious Peach Mountain. Unlike the bigwigs around the altar, the tens of thousands of devout believers who had just woken up from the rain of peach blossoms had no idea of the hidden dangers of today's right to light. They did not know who the fat man on the altar was either. They only knew that since he was the sacrifice for the right to light, he must be a rebellious and evil person. The believers stood on their tiptoes, trying to see the fat man more clearly. They stared at him with disgust and even hatred. If looks could kill, Chen Pipi would have been riddled with holes. Chen Pipi was fat and thick-skinned. He stood on the white stone altar, facing the tens of thousands of hostile eyes. He seemed to be unaware of them, and then he did something that no one expected. This was the right to light, a sacred altar. Everyone was waiting to see him burn to death, but he did not have any self-awareness as a sacrifice. He was either crying and repenting, or he was so nervous that his face turned pale, or he was like all the great devils in history, angrily rebuking the heavens and then being struck by lightning. He sat on the altar. Chen Pipi felt it was too tiring to stand. Besides, when he was escorted out of the U prison, he felt cold and uncomfortable. The altar was warmed by the autumn sun, so it should be more comfortable to sit. So he chose to sit. Why would he care about the murderous eyes and the sacred ceremony? Get this straight, I'm the one being burned to death, okay? Am I supposed to pay attention to my appearance at this time? Do you think I'm the second brother? The altar was indeed warm, even a little hot. Chen Pipi tilted his body and showed his left buttocks to the hierarch behind him. Then he opened his shirt and started fanning himself. This damned autumn. He wiped the sweat off his forehead with his sleeve and shouted to a West Hill Divine Guard below the altar, "It seems that you are still waiting for someone. Can you give me some water?" The expression on the West Hill Divine Guard's face was very stiff. He had never seen a prisoner on death row like this. He was clearly about to die, but he did not show any fear and even wanted to drink water. The VIPs who came to attend the right to light were very close to the white stone altar. When they heard Chen Pipi's words, their expressions changed. Monk Guanhai put his palms together and silently chanted the name of Buddha. He thought to himself that this man was indeed Ning Kei's senior brother. Even his style of doing things was the same, indescribable. Qi Nian silently thought to himself that Chen Pipi was indeed a disciple of the academy. He was still so ferocious even in the face of death. Emperor Yan Chongming frowned and thought to himself, this man is obviously not a Tang, but why does he speak and act like one? Yi Hongyu in the sacred sedan thought to herself, this guy is still so thick-skinned. General Lebu, the most powerful martial artist in the Golden Tribe Royal Court, looked at Chen Pipi on the altar and said in a low voice, "You are about to be burned to death by the divine fire. Are you afraid of thirst?" Chen Pipi acted as if he did not hear the sarcasm in General Lebu's words. He looked at him and explained seriously, being burned to death is completely different from dying of thirst. The West Hill Divine Palace has to keep their promise, right? General Lebu's face turned ugly upon hearing his words. Chen Pipi looked at him and shook his chubby index finger contemptuously. He continued, don't think that you can humiliate me just because I can't beat you now. If I were still the same old me, Lebu's face turned even darker. He took a step forward and then returned to the side of the nation master. Chen Pipi looked at the footprint left by his right foot on the hard ground and thought to himself, damn it, even if my ocean of qi and mountain of snow is not destroyed, I probably can't beat this man. The academy was particular about taking things for granted. The disciples of the back of the mountain liked to take things for granted and were used to using the word so everywhere. He was so ashamed that he became angry. He rolled up his sleeves and walked down the altar. He yelled at Lebu, if my father is not destroyed, he can crush you with his little finger. Any of my senior brothers and sisters can beat you until you cry for your parents. What right do you have to be so arrogant in front of me? Beat me to death now if you can." The sacrificial offering of the right to light walked down the altar by himself. It was a funny scene. It was chaos around the altar. The head of the Revelation Institute hurried to stop him with several West Hill Divine Guards. Chen Pippi did not stop. He cursed at Lebu through the Divine Guards, "Come and beat me to death if you can. What's there to be afraid of?" He then yelled at the head of the Revelation Institute and the Divine Guards, "Don't stop me. Let me beat up this grassland barbarian first. Are you people from the Central Plains or not? It's fine if you don't want to help me, but why are you stopping me? I won't run away. I just want to show him the unique skill of Haotian Taoism, natural stream magical finger." His ocean of qi and mountain of snow had been destroyed. It was difficult for him to catch a chicken, let alone the natural stream magical finger. But he still yelled desperately. He did not look like a genius of Haotian Taoism. He was more like a ruffian in the city. The Divine Hall felt like they had caught a chicken. They wondered if the sacred and solemn right to light was going to become a ridiculous farce. The head of the Revelation Institute said sternly, "Don't say anything. This is the respect of the Divine Hall to the Abbey Dean. If you don't want to be stuffed with your stinky socks, you'd better behave." Chen Pippi looked at the headmaster who was also in the knowing destiny state and said helplessly, "You are really knowledgeable. You can even deal with me." Without waiting for the head of the Revelation Institute to reply, he held his head high and said, "I want water. If you don't give me water, you can just kill me now." The national master of the Golden Tribe who had been silent and smiling suddenly spoke. This ordinary-looking old man was playing with the small wooden tripod in his hand. He looked at Chen Pippi and said, "The Abbey Dean is far away from the immortal world. Ordinary people like us can never hope to catch up to him. What Lebu said was indeed inappropriate. I apologize to you on his behalf." Chen Pippi squinted and looked at the small wooden tripod in the hands of the national master of the Golden Tribe. He found it familiar. Thinking of the title of the great divine priest of Precious Tripod, he became even more uncertain. The national master of the Golden Tribe looked at the head of the Revelation Institute and said with a smile, "I think it's okay to give him some water." The Golden Tribe Royal Court, which was the most powerful force in the wilderness, had changed their faith and became a follower of Tingri Heaven. They were bathed in the glory of Haotian just like the Central Plains. This was the biggest success of Taoism in countless years. The war that started last autumn almost drove the Tang Empire into despair. The West Hill Divine Palace followed the example of the Tang Empire's Southern Gate Temple and officially conferred the national master of the Golden Tribe as the Great Divine Priest of Precious Tripod. This was because the Golden Tribe Royal Court was as important to Taoism as the Tang Empire. The national master played the most important role in changing the faith of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. If it were not for his prestige in the grassland, how could Haotian Taoism successfully preach in the grassland? For the West Hill Divine Palace, it was still a mystery how the preaching divine priest who went to the wilderness could persuade the unfathomable national master. It would be fine if the national master had seen Haotian's miracle with his own eyes. However, as the war started, the Golden Tribe Royal Court fully cooperated with Taoism. The Divine Hall had no reason to doubt it. They could only attribute it all to the great will of Haotian Taoism. The head of the Revelation Institute looked at the hierarch's sacred sedan and did not hear any objections. He then waved his hand to signal the West Hill Divine Guards to bring a bowl of water. Chen Pippi held the bowl of water and sat on the white stone altar. He looked around and frowned slightly. The more solemn and sacred the right to light was, the more annoyed he was as a sacrifice. Therefore, he had made a scene earlier. But more importantly, he wanted to make the scene more chaotic. It would be best if he could find a way out of the chaos and let that barbarian called Lieb slap him to death with one palm strike. Chen Pipi was afraid of death. He was afraid of being burned by Haotian's divine flame or killed by a palm. But he was indeed seeking death, and a quick one at that. He did not want his fellow disciples from the academy to take the risk to save him. That day when he dragged the handcart in the wind and snow, he saw her. From that moment on, he knew that the academy could not win. Even if the headmaster was still in the human world, he could not win, not to mention that the headmaster had turned into the moon. After knowing that he had become a sacrifice for the right to light, he began to try to die. He hit the wall, refused to eat, bit his tongue, cut his wrists, swallowed porcelain pieces, destroyed his snow mountain and ocean of qi, and tried many other ways. However, the judicial department was very experienced in this aspect. The woman in charge of the judicial department knew him very well. He had no chance of success. As for destroying his snow mountain and ocean of qi, which seemed to be the most feasible. His snow mountain and ocean of qi had already been destroyed. How could he destroy it a second time? Chen Pipi frowned because he could not find Ning Quebec. Then he was happy because he did not see Jun Emo and Yi Su. His two most respected senior brothers and Tang Xiaotang did not appear. Frowning and happiness, these two different emotions showed the subtle difference between Ning Ke and the others. It was hard to describe, but if one were to force it, it would be the following. You and I are senior brothers and junior brothers are also brothers. I saved your life, so you have to save mine. Even though I said at the stone window that I did not want you to save me, how could you not come to save me? Of course, Chen Pipi did not want Ning Ke to come. But he felt a little disappointed and wronged when he could not find Ning Quebec. Moreover, there were tens of thousands of people in the front yard of Peach Mountain, but he did not know anyone. Wouldn't it be too lonely to die like this? Then, he saw the blood-red divine chariot and Yi Hongyu sitting in it. He realized that there was actually someone he knew. Even though he was about to die, he was still subconsciously afraid. Then he said something that he had wanted to say since he was a child. Yi Hongyu, you heartless girl. He held his belt and shouted in grief and indignation, when I was a child, my senior brother bought me 5 sugar cakes, and I let you eat 3. Now you have the nerve to watch me burn to death. I only peeped at you bathing once, right? How about I let you watch me today? Yi Hongyu, who was in the sacred sedan, wanted to tear his mouth apart. The headmaster of the Revelation Institute, who was standing by the altar, regretted not gagging him earlier. The sacred and solemn right to light had finally become absurd because of the sacrifice. The headmaster of the academy once said that Chen Pipi had a pure heart and was optimistic, so he entered the knowing destiny state. This was also the principle of the academy, so he became the youngest person to enter the knowing destiny state. He was just that optimistic, even though he was about to die. But he did not know if Haotian would find this really funny. I wrote it quite funny. I have already said that this night is a comedy, but you just did not believe me. There is a separate chapter below. It is not about canvassing for votes, but an announcement of several important things. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 874. The opening was clear. It was not to canvass for votes, but to report a few things. The first thing was that our dark-skinned Sang Sang won the best female lead in the role competition. Warm applause. As the honorary leader of Sang Sang's party, I would like to express my sincerest gratitude to everyone. Miss Shanshan, with thin eyebrows and thin lips, won the 3rd place for the best supporting female lead. Miss Yi Hongyu, who was covered in golden threads, won the Best Supporting Female Lead instead of the Best Male Lead. She was still in the top 5. Warm applause. On behalf of the two ladies, they thanked everyone for their love. The second thing was that the third episode of Showa Ye's Simplified Chinese had been published on all major websites. There was a link posted by Lazy at the top of the book review section. If everyone wanted to buy the physical book, they could buy it online. There was a discount, and it was more convenient. The third thing was that Chidian and YY had organized a novel-telling activity. Showa Ye was honored to be the subject of the story. The competition has officially begun. It will be the semi-finals and finals soon. On the 27th, during the finals, I might go and watch. There is an announcement on the homepage of Chidian about the details. Everyone can take a look. Also, please don't forget that the official channel of Showa Ye in YY is 55373. Those who like this can go there often. There are many good songs and fun people. The fourth thing was that there have been a lot of things to do recently. Thank you to the enthusiastic readers, the hardworking sub-editors, and the administrators of the chat groups. YY administrators, thank you all for your hard work. Recently, I have been focusing on writing the book and my neck. I really don't have the energy to deal with these things. Anyway, thank you very much. To express my gratitude, and probably because I had a good time writing the 3 chapters today, I will continue writing the 3 chapters tomorrow. See you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 875. She stood in the divine hall of light, looking down at the front yard of Peach Mountain with her hands clasped behind her back. She did not find it funny, only a little ridiculous, to see Chen Pippi making a scene and acting shamelessly. She remembered who Chen Pippi was. She had seen him many times in Chang'an and had even cooked noodles for him. He had the purest blood of Taoism. Even though he had lived in a disrespectful place like the academy for many years, deep in his heart, he still had faith in himself. Naturally, he also had doubts. The teachers and students of the Revelation Institute stood by the forest in the front yard of Peach Mountain, along with dozens of inconspicuous servants. Ning Kei stood in the crowd, watching the farce at the altar. He could not help but feel anxious. That night, Yi Hongyu let him out of the divine hall of judgment, which meant that there was a possibility. Coupled with her relationship with Yi Su, she should at least remain neutral today. However, she was the great divine priest of judgment. How could she tolerate being accused in front of tens of thousands of people that he had seen her naked when she was young? There were many others who were as worried as Ning Kei, including the head and deputy head of the Revelation Institute who presided over the right to light. Everyone in the divine hall knew how terrifying the great divine priest of judgment was. What if she was really angered by Chen Pippi and killed him before the right to light? The head of the Revelation Institute did not dare to look at the sacred sedan of judgment. He ordered the West Hill Divine Guards to put Chen Pippi on the altar. With the approval of the hierarch, the right to light began as soon as possible. During the sacrificial ceremony, the divine hall did not announce Chen Pippi's crimes. Instead, it started right away. The head of the Revelation Institute held a silk scroll made of gold and read the chapter of worship to heaven from the West Hill scriptures. This chapter mainly talked about the great merits Haotian had bestowed upon the human world. It had always been considered the most important of the 3 sacred chapters. The chapter to heaven from the scripture was the official right to light. The head of the Revelation Institute calmly and sincerely read the right to light. Every time he read a sentence, the teachers and students of the Revelation Institute would repeat it in perfect harmony. No one knew if there was a priest directing them or if they just did it on their own, but the tens of thousands of followers also began to repeat the rite to light like the teachers and students of the Revelation Institute. The chanting grew louder and more orderly, like the waves on the sea, each higher than the last, yet perfectly spaced between the waves. Gradually, it resounded throughout the Peach Mountain, as if it wanted to be heard by the high sky. Chenpipi sat on the white stone altar and picked up the bowl of water he had placed on the ground. He regretted that he had failed to provoke Yi Hongyu into killing him. He wanted to drink some water to soothe his throat. Suddenly, he heard waves of chanting coming from all around Peach Mountain. His right hand, which was holding the bowl, froze. He was born in Haotian Taoism and had memorized the West Hill scriptures since his childhood. He knew that the eulogy to heaven was very long. The people of the Divine Hall had just finished reading the first 2 paragraphs, which were full of believers' awe and love for Haotian. The next paragraph would describe Haotian's merits to the human world. His body froze. It was not because he subconsciously wanted to finish reciting the eulogy with the tens of thousands of followers, but because he sensed an indescribable pressure from the wave-like chanting. This pressure was absolutely pure power, absolutely high state, and did not belong to the human world at all. This pressure did not come from the pious chanting of tens of thousands of followers. It was summoned from the sky by the followers chanting. In other words, this pressure came from the sky. Chenpipi looked up at the sky and saw that the autumn sun had become even more dazzling. Countless rays of light fell on the white stone altar and fell on him. The light contained absolute pure power and absolute high state. This was the pressure he felt. The pressure seemed to be pressing him into the white stone altar. He was sitting on the altar, and at this moment, he even felt that his buttocks were connected to the slightly hot white stone. His face turned pale and he frowned. The bowl in his hand was smashed into powder under the light, and the water in the bowl splashed all over him. Facing the pressure from the sky, humans would subconsciously surrender or hide. Chenpipi did not want to surrender. He wanted to hide, but he found that he could no longer move. It was so difficult to even maintain the posture of looking up at the sky. His neck was so sore that it was unbearable. He felt that the seal on the ocean of qi and mountain of snow in his body suddenly loosened, but he was not happy. This was not a sign of recovery, but the beginning of the ocean of qi and mountain of snow melting. His ocean of qi and mountain of snow was sealed, but he was still optimistic because he had seen how Ning Ke embarked on the path of cultivation. Since Ning Ke could do it, why couldn't he, a peerless genius? He firmly believed that he could rebuild the ocean of qi and mountain of snow. It was not until this moment that he realized that under Haotian, all his thoughts were delusional. Chenpipi maintained the posture of looking up at the sky, watching the autumn sky become brighter and brighter, and watching the light falling on him become denser. Although he did not know what the last part of the rite to light was, he had a vague intuition that he would eventually melt in the sky and bid farewell to the world. Ning Ke had been watching from the crowd. His gaze passed over the shoulders of the handyman and fell on the white stone altar. His black eyes reflected the holy light and kept changing. He was very familiar with the Haotian divine flame. He knew that when the eulogy ended, the thousands of rays of light that fell on the white stone altar would turn into the purest Haotian divine flame, which was what the believers called the holy fire. Chenpipi would then become a wisp of green smoke in the divine flame. Ever since he saw the scene in the stone window between the cliffs, he had been thinking about how to save Chenpipi. He could not watch that guy burn to death, but he could not think of a good way. He had to wait for the change that third sister had mentioned. However, Chenpipi was about to die now, and the change had not appeared. He could not wait any longer, so he took a deep breath and prepared to act. Breathing made a sound, especially for a master of the diabolism like Ning Quebec. The breath he took before he exerted all his strength was like the autumn wind whistling through the forest. The handyman in front of him and Priest Moley, the deputy headmaster of the Revelation Institute, vaguely heard something. But before they could react, another sound attracted their attention. Ning Ke also heard that sound, so he hit his breath as fast as he could and slightly bent his back, turning back into the inconspicuous manservant in the crowd. The sound came from the periphery of the front yard of Peach Mountain. Someone was also chanting the Ode to Heaven. The content was almost the same as what the West Hill Divine Palace priests and tens of thousands of believers were chanting. Even the intonation was the same. There were only some minor differences in some paragraphs. However, it was these minor differences that made the sound of the eulogy very harsh. It was like a perfect and harmonious piece of music suddenly rang out with a crisp knock on bamboo. The voice continued chanting calmly. As it got closer and closer to Peach Mountain, the rhythm of the pious chanting of tens of thousands of believers was suddenly disrupted. The believers kneeling on the ground looked back in astonishment. The solemn chanting became much softer. Only the teachers and students of the Revelation Institute and the divine priests were still persisting, fighting against the chanting coming from the foot of Peach Mountain. A group of people came from the foot of Peach Mountain. Some were young, some were old, some were young, some were male, and some were female. They wore bamboo hats and had dark skin. They looked like fishermen by the sea, but they were dressed in noble red robes. The dozen or so red-robed priests who looked like fishermen walked slowly in a uniform rhythm. If one looked from the front, he could only see the old man at the front. The unique chanting came from these people. There were a dozen of them, but only one voice. Compared to the chanting of the divine halls, this was the perfect harmony. The dozen or so people came to the front yard of Peach Mountain. A clear light appeared and the first array of Peach Mountain was revealed. However, the old man did not stop. He kept walking, his face expressionless. Even the chanting did not stop. The words of the worship to heaven kept ringing out. The clear light gradually appeared and then faded away without showing any power. The priests in red who looked like fishermen walked onto the front yard of Peach Mountain. The dozens of papal cavalrymen and the divine guards of West Hill who had followed them here did not know what to do when they saw this scene. The red robes they were wearing were real. They could not be forged from the divine halls. More importantly, even the clear light array of the Peach Mountain had recognized their identity. Only the priests who were truly devoted to Haotian and had the blood of Haotian Taoism could pass through the clear light array so easily. The tens of thousands of believers on the front yard of Peach Mountain stood up and spread out like a tide. They made a path for the dozen or so people. These people still walked straight toward Peach Mountain. They looked devout and determined. They all worshipped Haotian, but they did not follow the same path as the divine halls. The headmaster of the Revelation Institute looked at the dozen or so people walking slowly toward them. His face turned pale. These people had suppressed the chanting of tens of thousands of believers and countless priests with just one voice. Naturally, it was not because of their cultivation, but because of their understanding of the eulogy. Therefore, these people had a better understanding of the West Hill scriptures than he did. Even the hierarch's understanding of the scriptures was not as profound as theirs. However, he had studied the scriptures all his life and was very familiar with the changes of the Worship to Heaven chapter. Why had he never heard of the original words of the Worship to Heaven chapter like this? Who were these people? Why were they so familiar with the scriptures? The guests who had come to participate in the Right to Light were also very surprised. They looked at these strange people, looked at their red divine robes, and guessed where they had come from and why they had come. Qi Nian was the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect. He had seen many old secrets of the cultivation world in the Xiankong temple. Looking at these red-robed priests who looked like fishermen, he frowned and thought of a possibility. Does the great divine priest of South Sea have a successor? These people walked slowly to the white stone altar and lined up in a straight line. Facing Chen Pipi on the altar, they continued to calmly and devoutly chant the worship to heaven chapter. The chanting from the divine halls of West Hill gradually died down until it could not be heard anymore. The tens of thousands of rays of light that fell on the white stone altar changed from coercion to pity, and then to love. I don't know what happened to me today. My eyes are a little blurred. I will try to finish the next chapter before 3:00. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.